The world has always been filled with stories, whispered, written, carved, and sometimes buried. But among them all, few have burned with the same quiet fire as the story of the Holy Grail. For centuries, it has been called a chalice, a cup, a relic of the Last Supper. Yet beneath that fragile image lies a secret so vast that kings, priests, and secret orders have fought to protect or destroy it. This is the story not of an object, but of a lineage, a bloodline said to carry the very essence of divinity itself. Imagine walking through the dim corridors of an ancient cathedral. The air is thick with the scent of incense and stone. The light from 1,000 candles flickers against mosaics of saints and martyrs. But somewhere, hidden among the images, the same symbol repeats again and again. The chalice, the rose, the serpent entwined. To most, they are harmless decorations, but to those who know what to look for, they are signposts pointing toward a mystery that refuses to die. The tale begins where faith and fear intersect, in a moment when the divine became flesh and flesh bled into history. The crucifixion of Christ is remembered as the moment humanity's sins were washed away. But what if it was also the moment a hidden future began? Some say that before he died, Christ left behind more than disciples and doctrine. He left behind life itself, a continuation of his blood through one he loved. Over the centuries, this idea became too dangerous to speak aloud. To claim that Christ had descendants was to challenge the very foundation of the church. The notion threatened to unravel the carefully woven tapestry of divine perfection. So it was buried, not only in texts and tombs, but in memory. Those who dared to hint at it were silenced. Those who guarded it were hunted. And yet, the legend survived. The camera drifts through the ruins of time. The crumbling walls of Montségur, the shadowed crypts of Rosslyn, the silent cloisters of forgotten abbeys. Beneath each stone lies a story that trembles between faith and heresy. It is said that within these sacred walls, secret brotherhoods preserve the truth through symbols, through art, through blood. The Grail, they believed, was not a vessel of gold, but of flesh, a living legacy that carried within it the spark of divinity. The legend first surfaced not as history, but as myth. Medieval poets wrote of knights who searched endlessly for the Holy Grail, believing it to be an object of pure power, a source of healing, redemption, and eternal life. But what if their quest was not for a relic, but for a person, a descendant hidden among kings and peasants alike, whose very existence could rewrite the story of salvation? The Grail was never meant to be found because it was never lost. It was hidden in blood. As time passed, the Church wove 1,000 layers of doctrine to conceal this truth. Artists, mystics, and scholars who sensed it were forced to speak in riddles. They encoded their understanding into paintings, architecture, and manuscripts. A chalice without a cup, a rose blooming from a cross, a woman veiled beside Christ, all fragments of a story that dared not be spoken aloud. Even Leonardo da Vinci, centuries later, would paint his rebellion in plain sight, hiding heresy in beauty. But secrets have gravity. They pull those who seek them closer, until curiosity becomes obsession. The rumor of Christ's bloodline drew the attention of orders that existed in shadow, the Knights Templar, the Priory of Chaon, and others whose true purposes were never fully known. Their power grew not only from wealth, but from knowledge. Some whispered that what they guarded beneath the Temple Mount was not treasure, but truth, proof that divine blood once mingled with mortal. Even now, historians debate whether the Grail ever existed, or if it was only the reflection of our longing, the human desire to touch something eternal. Yet the symbols endure. etched in the margins of illuminated manuscripts, woven into the stone of medieval cathedrals. They appear like a heartbeat hidden in architecture, pulsing quietly through centuries. Someone wanted this secret to survive. The story of the Grail has always been about transformation, of pain into purpose, of loss into legacy. And perhaps that is why it endures. It is more than a question of faith. It is a question of identity. If the bloodline of Christ survived, then divinity itself may not be distant or unreachable. It may flow through the veins of humankind. It may live within us still. The thought is both beautiful and terrifying. For if true, it would mean that the story we built our world upon, the story of the Son of God who ascended beyond flesh, was incomplete. It would mean that salvation was not a single moment on a hill outside Jerusalem, but a continuous inheritance passed through generations. An idea too powerful to be contained by scripture or stone. The wind moves through an empty chapel. Dust drifts in the light, like stars caught in suspension. Somewhere beneath the altar, beneath centuries of prayer and silence, lies a fragment of forgotten truth. A seal broken, a name erased, a lineage disguised beneath royal titles and forgotten graves. And still the legend whispers from the depths of time, from the stones of ancient sanctuaries, from the pages of forbidden texts. This is where our story begins, in silence, in secrecy, in the spaces between what is known and what is believed. A story written not only in ink and parchment, but in blood. The blood that once spilled upon the earth, the blood that built kingdoms, the blood that may yet hold the key to the divine. As the camera lingers on a carved rose window, the light fades, and the question remains, what if the Holy Grail was never a cup at all, but a bloodline? And what if that blood still flows quietly, invisibly, through the veins of the living? The stone remembers, the symbols remain, and somewhere, buried in time, the truth still waits to be found. The candlelight flickers across a long wooden table. 13 figures sit together, frozen in a moment that changed the world. Bread, wine, the weight of destiny. It is the final meal before betrayal, before sacrifice. We have seen this image countless times, painted and reimagined through centuries. Yet beneath the calm symmetry of Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper, something whispers, something uneasy. The scene hides a silence more powerful than its words, a message painted not for the church, but for the future. For centuries, the Holy Grail was believed to be the cup from which Christ drank during this sacred meal, the vessel that later caught his blood at the crucifixion. But when we look closely at Leonardo's masterpiece, something astonishing emerges. The cup, the very object that defined the legend, is missing. There is no golden chalice before Christ, no sacred relic, no symbol of divine blood. Instead, there is only emptiness. And in that emptiness, some see the first clue to a far greater mystery. Da Vinci was no ordinary artist. He was a scholar of symbols, a man who hid truths in plain sight. In The Last Supper, his figures are arranged not in piety, but in tension. Their gestures form shapes, lines, and patterns that tell another story, one that cannot be spoken aloud. Look to Christ's right hand, and you will see not a rugged apostle, but a figure of delicate grace, her face soft, her body curved. She leans away from Christ, forming a perfect V between them, a symbol that, to some, represents the feminine womb, the vessel of life itself. Many believe this is not the Apostle John, as church tradition insists, but Mary Magdalene, the woman who, in secret writings, was called the companion of the Savior. Her presence beside Christ, her mirrored posture, her flowing hair, all suggest intimacy, equality, and an unspoken bond. The missing chalice begins to make sense. If Mary Magdalene herself was the Grail, the bearer of sacred blood, then the cup was never an object to find, but a person to protect. The Gnostic texts discovered centuries after Leonardo's time seem to echo this possibility. In the Gospel of Philip, an ancient Coptic manuscript found in Egypt, a single line stands like a flame against centuries of dogma. The companion of the Savior is Mary Magdalene. He loved her more than all the disciples. It is a sentence the early church tried to erase, a truth buried beneath mountains of interpretation. But if Da Vinci knew, if he believed this secret, his painting could be his confession, his rebellion against silence. Every detail of the Last Supper pulses with deliberate meaning. Christ's hands, one reaching toward the bread, the other toward the wine, form a triangle pointing downward, the ancient symbol of the feminine. The arrangement of the disciples, split into groups of 3, recalls sacred numerology. Even the window behind Christ, framing his head like a halo, evokes not only divinity, but also the geometry of the womb. It is as though Da Vinci tried to tell us that holiness was not only in heaven, but in life itself, in creation, in continuity, in love. For those who have studied his secret notebooks, this pattern is no accident. Leonardo was known to explore forbidden philosophies, Hermeticism, alchemy, and the mystical union of opposites, male and female, spirit and matter, heaven and earth. To him, divinity was not something distant, but something alive in human form. And perhaps, in painting the Last Supper, he sought to preserve a truth that had been exiled from faith, that the divine and the human were never meant to be separate. But art has power, and power has consequences. The Church, which had long defined itself through the authority of sacred interpretation, could not allow such ideas to spread. To suggest that Christ and Magdalene shared a sacred bond, a bloodline, was to imply that divine authority flowed not through Rome, but through flesh, through descendants, through families. The implications were revolutionary. If a child had been born from that union, that child would carry a claim not only to spiritual inheritance, but to earthly power. Through the centuries, those who studied Da Vinci's works noticed patterns repeated across his other paintings. The soft features of his women, their mysterious smiles, the echo of sacred geometry hidden in their posture. The Virgin of the Rocks, St. John the Baptist, and even the Mona Lisa have been said to contain subtle nods to this same enigma. The union of opposites, the divine and the mortal, the secret of the living Grail. But Da Vinci was careful. His art was his language, his sanctuary. He left no written confession, only symbols and silence. His contemporaries called him eccentric, heretical, dangerous. And yet his works endured, quietly preserving a message that only the daring could interpret. Over time, his Last Supper became more than a painting. It became a mirror, reflecting back humanity's hunger to know its origins, its divinity, its hidden truth. The absence of the chalice is no longer an oversight. It is an invitation, a riddle left for those who believe that the greatest mysteries of faith are not found in objects, but in the people who carried them forward. As centuries passed, this idea became a quiet rebellion within the heart of Christianity, whispered among mystics, coded in manuscripts, disguised in the architecture of chapels and cathedrals. Perhaps the secret was never meant to destroy faith, but to deepen it, to remind us that the divine story did not end on the cross, but continued through love, through lineage, through those who came after. The Last Supper, then, is not a farewell, it is a beginning. And as the candles fade and the figures dissolve back into shadow, we are left with a single haunting thought. If the chalice never existed, then where did the blood of Christ truly flow? The answer may lie not in gold or glass, but in the forgotten bond between a man and a woman, a bond powerful enough to shape 2,000 years of silence. The painting remains still, eternal, silent, yet beneath its silence, the code endures, waiting for those with eyes to see. The sea was calm that morning, the waves soft against the wooden hull of a small boat drifting across the Mediterranean. Inside it, legend says, were 3 women and a secret the world was never meant to know. Among them, a woman called Mary Magdalene, her face hidden beneath a worn veil, her hands wrapped around a small bundle held close to her heart. To some, she was a sinner redeemed by Christ's mercy. To others, she was something far more dangerous, his wife, his companion, the bearer of his blood. Her name was almost erased from history. For centuries, she was cast as the repentant harlot, her image twisted into a warning for women who sought too much closeness to holiness. But in older, forbidden texts, she is described as something different. The apostle of apostles, the first witness to the resurrection, the one who understood Christ's teachings more deeply than any man beside him. And in the shadows of early Christianity, whispers began to spread that Mary carried more than faith with her when she fled Jerusalem. She carried the continuation of the divine itself. The Gnostic Gospels, uncovered from the sands of Egypt after nearly 2,000 years, give her back her voice. In the Gospel of Mary, she speaks calmly to frightened disciples after Christ's death, offering wisdom when the men falter. Peter challenges her authority, but she does not waver. "Does he love you more than us?" he asks. Her silence is her answer. To the followers of the secret faith, Mary was not only a disciple, but a mirror, the human vessel through which divinity was expressed. But how does one preserve such a truth in a world that fears it? As the Roman Empire turned its gaze toward the rising faith, the church that formed in its shadow grew wary of anything that threatened its structure. A female apostle, especially one with a claim to divine intimacy, was unacceptable. The Council of Nicaea, centuries later, would codify Christ's story into dogma, carefully shaping it into something stable, masculine, eternal. Mary's role was reduced, rewritten, and finally reimagined as repentance. But her disappearance from Scripture only deepened the mystery. Legends claim that after the crucifixion, as persecution spread, Mary and a small group of followers fled the Holy Land. Some say they escaped across the sea in a frail, oarless boat, guided only by faith and destiny. Their journey ended on the southern shores of Gaul, in what is now the south of France. There, in a quiet coastal town known today as Saint-Mer-de-Mer, the local people still tell the story of 3 women who came from the east, carrying relics and secrets. Among them was a woman called Mary, who preached beneath the open sky, her words filled with the quiet fire of truth. It was there, according to the old traditions, that she lived out her remaining years, not as an exile, but as a guardian. She became the founder of the first Christian community in Europe, teaching love and forgiveness in secret gatherings. Some say she carried a child, the living echo of Christ's legacy. The child's name is lost, but the bloodline, the story insists, survived, hidden among the people of the land, disguised beneath generations of noble families. The church called it blasphemy, but those who believed whispered another word: destiny. In a small grotto near Marseille, a cave still bears her name, La Sainte-Baume, the Holy Cave. Pilgrims visit it even now, their candles lighting the ancient walls. Within its silence, There's a strange peace, as though time itself pauses to listen. Medieval chroniclers wrote that Mary spent her final years there in prayer and solitude, her tears carving paths through the stone. Yet for those who follow the legend of the bloodline, the cave is more than a shrine. It is a cradle, the place where the secret of the Grail took root in the soil of France. Art and myth would later preserve her image not as the penitent sinner, but as something luminous. Painters of the Renaissance began to depict her with symbols of both motherhood and divinity: a red robe for love, a blue cloak for heaven, and a jar of alabaster that was said to contain not oil, but memory. In some works, she appears with a faintly swollen belly, her eyes turned toward the horizon. Her story, it seems, could not be completely silenced. It continued in symbols, in whispers, in stone. Over the centuries, the story evolved, carried by troubadours, monks, and secret orders. The Knights Templar, centuries later, would establish their fortresses in the same regions tied to her legend, their banners marked with the Red Cross, a symbol that some believe represents the union of divine and mortal. Even the Priory of Chaon, if such a brotherhood truly existed, claimed to protect the descendants of that sacred union. To them, the Grail was not a relic to be worshipped, but a lineage to be preserved. The implications of this belief were profound. If Christ had fathered a child, that child's descendants would carry the dual nature of humanity and divinity, a living bridge between heaven and earth. They would not be gods, but reminders of the divine potential within all people. To those who sought to control faith, such an idea was intolerable. A church built on hierarchy and fear could not allow salvation to live within flesh and blood. And so, through persecution and propaganda, Mary Magdalene was reduced from holy vessel to fallen woman. Yet even in ruin, she endured. Her exile, both physical and spiritual, mirrors the fate of every truth too dangerous to tell. Cast out, misnamed, misunderstood, yet never erased. Across cathedrals in Europe, her image hides in plain sight. The woman kneeling at Christ's feet, her hair loose and golden, her eyes filled not with guilt, but with recognition. She knows something that the others do not, that the story is not ending, but beginning again. And perhaps that is her greatest secret. The Grail, the bloodline, the legacy, they all begin with her. A woman silenced by history, yet still whispering through it. Her exile was not punishment, it was preservation. In the quiet hills of southern France, among the olive trees and ruined chapels, her name still carries weight. Pilgrims still walk where she walked, still light candles in the cave where she prayed. The sea that once carried her from the Holy Land still touches those shores, murmuring her secret with every tide. It is a story not of power, but of endurance, of a truth that refused to die. For in every age, when faith becomes too rigid and history too certain, the legend of Mary Magdalene rises again, carrying with it the question that no empire, no church, no king has ever been able to silence. What if the bride of Christ never left this world alone? And with that question, the waves return to the shore, gentle, endless, eternal, as though still carrying the echoes of her journey and the bloodline she may have borne across the sea. The journey began in silence, a small, weather-worn boat rocking on the waves of the Mediterranean, its passengers clinging to faith more than to hope. Among them, legend says, was Mary Magdalene, perhaps with her sister Martha, her servant Sarah, and a handful of loyal followers. They had fled from a land tearing itself apart, from the death of man whose teachings threatened empires, from a truth that could not be contained. There was no map, no sail, and no oars. Only a promise whispered to the sea, that they would be guided to safety by divine will. The wind carried them west toward the setting sun. For days, perhaps weeks, they drifted without direction. Food dwindled, thirst grew, and still the horizon gave no sign of land. Yet somehow, against every law of reason, they survived. At last, the pale line of a foreign shore appeared, a land of salt marshes, white horses, and endless light. The southern coast of Gaul, what we now call France. Here, their boat touched sand, and their exile found its sanctuary. The people who lived in that region were simple fishermen and herders, unaware that history had just washed upon their shores. They saw in the strangers a kind of holiness. Women clothed in linen, faces weathered but calm, carrying small relics wrapped in cloth. One of them, the woman with red hair, they called Mary Magdalene. The place of their landing was later named Saintes Mères de Mer, the Holy Marys of the Sea, a name that still holds the weight of that ancient arrival. From here, the legend splits in two directions, one mystical, one historical. The mystical tale says that Mary carried a secret more precious than any relic, the living seed of Christ's bloodline. She settled in the valleys of Provence, her child growing under the shadow of the mountains. In time, her descendants intermarried with local nobility, forming the earliest roots of what would become the Merovingian dynasty, a royal line that claimed divine right not from conquest, but from blood. To this day, some genealogies trace those lines with trembling fascination, wondering where myth ends and memory begins. The historical thread tells a quieter story. Mary, along with her companions, began to preach among the villages and settlements of the region. She spoke of love, forgiveness, and the eternal life of the Spirit. Her words were gentle, but unlike anything the people had heard before. They said she healed the sick, comforted the dying, and drew even the most skeptical hearts to listen. Slowly, a small Christian community took root, the first in Europe. It was here, far from the centers of power, that the flame of faith began to spread, nurtured by exiles who carried both grief and revelation. In the hills of Provence, hidden between olive trees and lavender fields, there still stands a cave known as La Sainte-Baume. The entrance is narrow, but within it opens into a cathedral of stone, vast and echoing. Water drips from the ceiling like tears. Candles flicker in the darkness, their flames mirrored by the damp rock. Pilgrims who visit say the air feels alive, almost watchful, as if the cave itself remembers. This, they say, was where Mary lived her final years in contemplation, away from the noise of the world. Some believe she raised her child there, hidden from those who sought to erase her. Others believe she lived alone, carrying her secret into the silence of the earth. What cannot be denied is the power of this place. For nearly 2,000 years, pilgrims, kings, monks, and the desperate have climbed those hills to kneel in that darkness. They whisper prayers not only for salvation, but for understanding, for connection to something greater than the stories told in churches. The atmosphere is thick with reverence, as if the stones themselves know that a truth beyond Scripture once passed through here. Over time, the legend of Mary's arrival fused with the soul of southern France. Small chapels were built where she was said to have preached. Springs were named for her, said to hold healing power. Her story intertwined with that of Saint Sarah, her dark-skinned companion, who became a symbol of the outcast and the hidden faith. The local Romani people, centuries later, adopted her as their patron saint, Sarah-la-Calais. And every May, they gather in Sainte-Omer to carry her statue into the sea, reenacting the ancient arrival of the exiles. The ritual still draws thousands, each pilgrim carrying both devotion and curiosity, unsure where faith ends and legend begins. But within this ritual, something ancient stirs, the memory of a woman who crossed an impossible sea to preserve an impossible truth. It is not only about religion, it is about survival. It is about the determination of a story that refused to die, carried across waters that have swallowed empires. For those who believe in the bloodline theory, this journey was not an accident of exile, but an act of destiny, the deliberate planting of a divine seed in European soil from which kingdoms and myths would later grow. As centuries passed, the Church tolerated these stories, but only barely. Officially, Mary was honored as a saint, her image placed in stained glass and carved in stone. But the deeper story of the woman who bore the living legacy of Christ was never recognized. It survived only in whispers, in art, encoded legends that spread quietly through the south of France. Troubadours sang of a rose of the sea and a queen without a crown. In her, they found not sin but sanctity, not subservience but strength. The hills of Provence hold their silence well. Beneath the vineyards and ruined abbeys, archaeologists have uncovered strange carvings. The Grail symbol, the fleur-de-lis, the rose entwined with the cross. They appear on tombs of forgotten nobles, on the stones of abandoned churches. Each one a fragment, a clue, a whisper that the story of Mary's flight was more than myth. It was the beginning of something, the quiet birth of the legend of the Holy Blood. As twilight falls over the southern coast, the same sea that once carried her still glows red beneath the setting sun. The waves lap gently against the shore, erasing footprints but never memory. Somewhere beyond the horizon lies the land she left behind, Jerusalem, the city of beginnings and betrayals. But here, in the soft light of France, a new story began. A story not of miracles performed, but of a lineage preserved. A story that would echo through centuries, through secret societies and royal families, through paintings and manuscripts, all leading back to one woman who refused to let her truth die. Mary Magdalene's journey across the sea was not just a flight from persecution. It was the crossing of history itself. And as the camera fades from the waves to the candlelit cave of Saint Baume, her legend whispers once more, the Grail was not lost. It simply found a new home, hidden beneath the soil of the south of France, waiting for the world to remember. Centuries passed, and the world around the southern coast of France began to change. Empires rose and fell. Kingdoms were forged through steel and faith, and the Church grew from a persecuted sect into the single most powerful institution in Europe. Yet, buried beneath this transformation, an older current flowed, silent, persistent, and dangerous. It was said that among the early tribes and noble families of Gaul, there existed a dynasty unlike any other. Their kings were not crowned by conquest, but by blood, a blood that, according to legend, carried the divine spark of Christ himself. This dynasty would come to be known as the Merovingians. Their story begins in the shadows of the collapsing Roman Empire, when barbarian tribes were carving new nations from its dying carcass. Among these tribes were the Franks, fierce warriors of the north, led by a mysterious chieftain named Merovec. According to chroniclers, Merovec's conception was not ordinary. His mother, while bathing in the sea, was said to have been visited by a creature of light, half human, half divine. From this union, the child Merovec was born, marked by destiny. The tale may sound mythical, yet in the language of symbols, it echoes something older, the merging of two worlds, the human and the divine. To those who sought to preserve the secret of Christ's bloodline, this myth was no coincidence. The creature of light was a metaphor, a veiled reference to a sacred lineage that had survived in exile since the 1st century. The blood of Christ, through Mary Magdalene, had mingled with the nobility of Gaul. And from that union emerged a new order of rulers, divine by heritage, not by church decree. The Merovingian kings ruled from the 5th to the 8th century, their reign marked by strange customs and an aura of sanctity that set them apart. Unlike later monarchs who wore crowns of gold, the Merovingians were said to wear their hair long, uncut, as a symbol of their sacred power. Their subjects believed that their strength resided in those locks, that to cut a Merovingian's hair was to strip him of his divine right. They were not merely kings. They were living symbols of a connection between heaven and earth. Under their rule, the Franks united vast regions of what is now France, Belgium, and Western Germany. They built monasteries, patronized scholars, and forged alliances that laid the foundations of medieval Europe. But their reign was not just political, it was spiritual. The Church, though powerful, treated the Merovingians with a curious reverence, almost as if recognizing a holiness they could not control. Ancient texts refer to them as Rex Crinitus, the long-haired kings, but also in some circles as kings by the grace of God in a literal sense. But with time, reverence turned to fear. The Church, consolidating its authority, began to see the Merovingians not as allies, but as rivals, potential claimants to a divine legitimacy that could undermine papal supremacy. To admit that Christ's blood continued through a royal bloodline would unravel centuries of theology. If the Son of God had descendants, then the entire foundation of the Church's intercession, its monopoly over salvation, would be questioned. Thus began the slow, methodical erasure of the Merovingians. Their sacred heritage was recast as superstition. Their miracles were dismissed as pagan remnants. Their kings, once revered, were portrayed as lazy, decadent, and unworthy. The Church allied itself with a powerful new family, the Carolingians, who sought to replace the old dynasty. Pepin the Short, father of Charlemagne, eventually deposed the last Merovingian king, Childeric III, in 751 AD. The scene was symbolic. The sacred hair of Childeric was cut, his divine rights severed, his body cast into monastic exile. The Carolingians, supported by the Pope, took the throne, their coronation marking the rise of a new world order where the Church would choose kings, not blood. Yet, even in defeat, the legend did not die. Beneath the surface of official history, whispers persisted. Secret manuscripts hinted that some members of the royal bloodline had escaped, smuggled away by loyalists to the south, perhaps even back to the same valleys where Mary Magdalene once preached. There, it was said, they intermarried with local nobility, creating an unbroken chain of descent stretching from Christ to medieval Europe. In time, this hidden lineage became the beating heart of countless heresies, legends, and secret orders. The Cathars, who emerged in the Languedoc region centuries later, were said to protect ancient wisdom, teachings about a divine feminine, about love that transcended death, and about a truth older than Rome. Some historians now believe that the Cathar movement may have been the last visible echo of that original bloodline, before the Church annihilated them in the Albigensian Crusade. The symbols of the Merovingians lingered too. The fleur-de-lis, representing purity and divine light. The bee, symbol of resurrection and immortality. Napoleon himself, centuries later, adopted the bee as his imperial emblem, claiming to be restoring the legacy of the first kings of France. Whether he knew the deeper meaning or not, the symbolism was unmistakable, the rebirth of a sacred right once buried by the Church. But perhaps the strangest part of the Merovingian story lies not in their reign, but in their graves. In 1653, archaeologists uncovered the tomb of King Childeric I in Tournai, filled with gold, weapons, and hundreds of small golden bees, an insect never before seen in royal insignia. Why bees? To the initiated, bees were symbols of divine order, the harmony between heaven and earth. To others, they hinted at something deeper, the secret continuity of the bloodline, the hum of life eternal. As the centuries rolled on, traces of the Merovingian legend were woven into art, architecture, and secret society lore. The Priory of Chaon, the Templars, and later the Rosicrucians, all, in some way, drew from this idea that a sacred lineage once flowed through the veins of kings, and that its preservation was not mere politics, but prophecy. Whether the Merovingians truly descended from Christ or not may never be proven. But their story, half myth, half forbidden memory, changed the course of European consciousness. They were kings undone by the fear of their own holiness, rulers who carried within them a secret too dangerous to be spoken aloud. And as their line disappeared from the throne, the question remained, where did the blood go next? If the divine lineage survived, it would have hidden itself well, protected by those who understood its significance. Some say it vanished entirely. Others believe it was merely waiting, sleeping beneath the surface of history, ready to re-emerge when the world was ready to remember. And so, as the lights fade from the golden bees of Tournai, our journey turns toward those who would claim to guard this secret through the centuries. Men bound by oaths, symbols, and silence. The guardians of the blood, the keepers of the Grail. The Middle Ages were a time of shadows and light, faith and fear, revelation and repression. Europe trembled beneath the cross, a continent torn between spiritual hunger and political control. Beneath the towering cathedrals and sacred chants, another world moved in silence. It was a world of symbols, brotherhoods, and whispered truths, a web of hidden orders dedicated not merely to faith, but to the preservation of something older and far more dangerous, the secret of the blood. As the Church consolidated its dominance, those who knew too much were silenced. Heretical movements were hunted, burned, erased. But secrets have a way of surviving, not through words, but through ritual, architecture, and code. It is within this silence that the legend of the Guardians begins, the protectors of the Holy Blood and the Hidden Grail. Some scholars trace their beginnings to the monks of early Provence, descendants of those who had once sheltered Mary Magdalene. These monks, known as custodes sanguinis, keepers of the blood, carried knowledge that was both sacred and forbidden. They built chapels in remote valleys, carved strange symbols into their stonework, the rose, the cross, the chalice. Their rituals blended Christian liturgy with something far older, an acknowledgement of the divine feminine and the sacred union of opposites. In their prayers, Christ and Mary were not merely teacher and follower. They were two halves of one cosmic truth. Centuries later, when the Crusades began, the Church sent its knights east to reclaim the Holy Land. But among them, a select few carried a different mission, one never written in papal decrees. These were the Knights Templar, a brotherhood founded in the early 12th century under the guise of protecting pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem. In reality, their true purpose was veiled, perhaps even from many of their own members. The Templars quickly became more than soldiers. They were scholars, architects, financiers, and, in the eyes of many, mystics. In the ruins of Solomon's Temple, they are said to have discovered scrolls, relics, and knowledge long buried since the fall of Jerusalem. Whatever they found transformed them. Within a few decades, the Templars had become the most powerful order in Europe, rich beyond measure, answerable only to the Pope, and shrouded in secrecy. Some legends claim that among their discoveries was proof of the bloodline, records linking the descendants of Christ to noble families of Europe. Others say they unearthed the Holy Grail itself, not a cup, but a symbol of the sacred blood, a metaphor for the living lineage. To the initiated, the Grail was never an object to be found, but a truth to be guarded. The revelation that divinity had once walked the earth as flesh and blood, and that its legacy continued through humanity itself. To protect this knowledge, the Templars developed a secret hierarchy, hidden within their rituals and architecture. Their churches were built with geometries that encoded ancient wisdom. The rose windows, the circular naves, the alignment with celestial bodies, all reflections of a higher order. To the untrained eye, these were merely expressions of devotion. But to those who knew the language of symbols, they were maps, pathways to understanding the sacred union of heaven and earth, spirit and blood. But the Templars' power drew suspicion. By the early 14th century, their wealth rivaled that of kings, and their influence extended into every corner of Christendom. Rumors spread of secret rites, of heresies, of worshipping a mysterious head known as Baphomet. Yet beneath the accusations lay a deeper fear, that the Templars held proof of a truth that could unmake the Church's authority. If they possessed evidence of a living bloodline descending from Christ, the entire foundation of papal power, built on the belief that divine authority flowed only through Rome, would crumble. On a cold October night in 1307, the trap was sprung. Across France, the Templars were arrested by order of King Philip IV, acting with papal approval. Tortured into confession, their leaders were accused of blasphemy, heresy, and dark magic. But what the world saw as destruction was, in reality, a smokescreen. Many of the order's treasures and records vanished before the arrests, spirited away by brothers who had been warned. Some fled to Scotland, others to Portugal, and still others to the mountains of southern France, the same region that had sheltered Mary Magdalene and the early guardians. In these hidden places, the legacy endured. The surviving Templars merged into other movements, the stonemasons' guilds, the Rosicrucians, and, centuries later, the Freemasons. Across these groups ran a common thread: reverence for the light, belief in sacred geometry, and cryptic references to a hidden truth passed through generations. Their symbols, the compass, the square, the rose, and the cross, all echoed the same mystery: the union of divine and human, the secret of the blood. Even the legends of the Holy Grail evolved under their influence. The medieval poet Chrétien de Troyes, writing in the late 12th century, introduced the first literary appearance of the Grail, not as a chalice, but as a mysterious vessel of divine light. His patron was linked to families rumored to descend from the Merovingians. Was this mere coincidence or coded remembrance? Later, Wolfram von Eschenbach-Parzival described the Grail as a stone from heaven, guarded by a secret order of knights, a direct mirror of the Templars themselves. By then, the Guardians had become myth. Yet within the art and architecture of Europe, their presence was everywhere. In Chartres Cathedral, the labyrinth carved into the floor was said to represent the journey to enlightenment, or the path toward rediscovering the lost truth. The twin towers mirrored the Templar ideal of duality, masculine and feminine, faith and reason, spirit and blood. The question that lingers is this: what exactly were they guarding? Was it a relic, a document, a secret child of history? Or was it something more profound, A truth so transformative it could shatter empires? Perhaps that is why their story persists. The guardians of the secret were not merely defending a family line, but the very idea that divinity is not distant, that it flows through humanity itself, through generations, through love and legacy. The Church offered salvation through worship. The guardians offered it through remembrance. As centuries turned, the names changed, the symbols evolved, but the silence remained. A brotherhood moving through time like a shadow, protecting a secret older than kingdoms and more sacred than Scripture. And in that silence lies the next chapter of our journey. The clues they left behind, scattered across the landscapes of France and beyond. Symbols in stone, encoded in art and myth, waiting for the world to notice. For though their names were erased, the guardians never vanished. They simply went underground, waiting for a time when the truth they protected could rise again, like the dawn after 1,000 years of darkness. There are some truths that cannot be spoken, only carved. When words are forbidden and books are burned, symbols become the language of survival. Across Europe, from the windswept coast of Brittany to the sunlit valleys of Provence, a silent code was etched into the very bones of the earth. Cathedrals, chapels, and ancient ruins all seem to whisper the same story. A story of the holy blood, the divine feminine, and a secret lineage protected by stone itself. The medieval mind saw architecture not merely as construction, but as revelation. Every arch, every pillar, every carving was deliberate, a sermon in geometry, a prayer made visible. The Gothic cathedrals that rose in the 12th and 13th centuries were more than houses of worship. They were cosmic machines designed to channel light, harmony, and sacred meaning. To the untrained eye, they were monuments of faith. To the initiated, they were maps, star charts carved in limestone, pointing toward hidden truths that could not be written aloud. Among these cathedrals, few speak louder than Chartres. Rising from the plains of France, it stands like a frozen hymn, a labyrinth of shadow and illumination. Its construction was mysteriously rapid, its funding uncertain, its origins tied to a network of master builders rumored to have been descended from Templar craftsmen. The west facade of Chartres holds hundreds of statues, but one in particular draws the eye, the figure of the Black Madonna. Draped in darkness, serene yet powerful, she gazes downward as if guarding a secret within her. For centuries, pilgrims have come to kneel before her, seeking her blessing. But to those who know the old code, she represents something else, the embodiment of the sacred feminine, the living counterpart to the divine masculine, and the key to understanding the mystery of the Grail. At the heart of Chartres lies its labyrinth, a perfect circle set into the floor, measuring 42 feet across. Those who walk it speak of feeling pulled into another dimension, a space between time and eternity. The path winds back and forth, never straight, like the journey of truth itself. Hidden, winding, demanding patience. Some believe the labyrinth symbolizes the path of initiation once walked by the guardians of the bloodline. Each turn, a lesson. Each step, a descent into understanding. And at the center, illumination, the return to the source. But Chartres is not alone. Across France, subtle clues repeat themselves. In Rennes-le-Château, a small hilltop village in the Languedoc, a church dedicated to Mary Magdalene hides among the trees. Its priest in the late 19th century, Berenger Saunier, suddenly became inexplicably wealthy after rumored discoveries beneath the altar. He restored the church with lavish, bizarre decorations. Angels holding scrolls, serpents coiling around fonts, Latin phrases that make no sense to the ordinary visitor but form riddles for the initiated. Above the entrance, a single phrase is carved: Terribilis est locus ist. This place is terrible, or more precisely, this place is awe-inspiring. Inside, the Stations of the Cross show scenes subtly altered from biblical tradition. Christ is depicted not as divine, but human, tenderly assisted by a woman whose face mirrors Mary Magdalene. Behind the altar stands a statue of her holding a skull, not as a symbol of death, but of memory. Beneath the floor, it is said, Saunier found documents, perhaps genealogies or relics, that linked his humble parish to the Lost Bloodline of Christ. The church silenced him, but the symbols he left behind turned the village into a magnet for seekers and theorists. Elsewhere, in Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, another architectural enigma linked to Templar lore, the stone carvings tell the same tale. Built in the 15th century, its walls are adorned with hundreds of mysterious motifs. Roses entwined with crosses, vines shaped like DNA strands, even carvings of plants unknown in Europe at the time, such as maize and aloe, suggesting knowledge from distant lands long before Columbus. But hidden among these symbols is something deeper. Depictions of two figures standing together, male and female, holding a chalice between them. Some see in this image the union of Christ and Magdalene, the sacred marriage, encoded in stone. Art historians dismiss such interpretations as coincidence, but the repetition across centuries and continents is difficult to ignore. Roses, chalices, bees, serpents, and labyrinths. They appear again and again, in different forms, yet always pointing to the same essence: rebirth, union, continuity. The guardians of the secret, unable to speak openly, turned architecture into testimony. Every column became a sentence, every stained glass window a cipher. And yet, the deeper one looks, the stranger the connections become. The rose window, central to nearly every Gothic cathedral, is not simply decoration. Its circular form mirrors both the solar disk and the womb, an image of creation itself. When sunlight streams through it, colored by the glass, it paints the floor in living fire, a visual metaphor for divine light entering matter. The rose was also Mary Magdalene's symbol, known as the Rosa Mystica, the hidden flower blooming in secrecy. Even the very word Grail, Grail, holds a double meaning. Rearranged, it becomes Sang-Real, royal blood. Whether this linguistic coincidence was intentional or not, medieval poets and architects seem to understand its power. The Grail was both cup and lineage, both vessel and blood. It was the union of matter and spirit, and those who guarded its secret encoded this truth in every stone they touched. For those who have studied these structures closely, the similarities form a pattern too precise to be chance. Cathedrals built miles apart follow the same geometric ratios, align with the same constellations, and share identical proportions based on sacred numbers: 3, 7, 12, 33, each carrying ancient mystical significance. To walk through these cathedrals is to step into a living code, a message left for future generations. The truth is still here. Look closer. But perhaps the most haunting thought is this: that these cathedrals, these masterpieces of faith, might have been funded, designed, and consecrated not just as tributes to God, but as monuments to the divine bloodline itself. A hidden message to those who could read between the stones, that the true church was not of marble and mortar, but of living flesh, a lineage carried in silence through time. The church may have built over the truth, but the builders left a trail too beautiful to erase. Even now, centuries later, the symbols remain, staring down from arches, glowing through stained glass, carved into the bones of history itself. And so, as night falls over the great cathedrals and the last rays of sunlight pass through their rose windows, the stones themselves seem to whisper, "The secret is not gone." It was never gone. It was written in light and shadow, waiting for those who remember how to see. From here, our path leads deeper still, into the hidden valleys and mountain fortresses where the guardians made their final stand, and where the Grail, or what it represented, may have been kept safe for centuries. For not all the symbols were meant to be read. Some were meant to be followed. Beneath the soaring arches of medieval cathedrals, artisans carved roses into stone and painted strange vessels in the hands of angels. The Holy Grail, a cup, a chalice, or perhaps something far less tangible, began to haunt the imagination of Christendom. But what if the Grail was never meant to be found in a church or hidden in a mountain cave? What if it was not an object at all, but a bloodline? The earliest whispers came from the 12th century, woven through the verses of poets who claimed divine inspiration. In Chrétien de Troyes' unfinished poem Perceval, Le Conte du Graal, the mysterious Grail first appeared, not as a golden cup, but as a radiant object carried by a maiden, glowing with otherworldly light. Later storytellers, from Robert de Boron to Wolfram von Eschenbach, reshaped it into a holy vessel that had caught the blood of Christ at his crucifixion. Yet, as the myths evolved, the symbols seemed to move from the realm of relics to that of secrets. Each retelling hinted that the Grail's true power lay not in stone or metal, but in what it contained. Among those who read between the lines was a quiet brotherhood of scholars and mystics. They noted how the word sang-real, Holy Grail in Old French, could also be divided as sang-real, meaning royal blood. This linguistic twist transformed the legend overnight. Could the Grail be a coded message about divine lineage, the blood of Christ continuing through generations? Suddenly, the sacred cup became a metaphor for something forbidden, a human continuation of the divine. If the Grail symbolized blood and not simply wine, then the Christian mysteries took on a shocking new dimension. The Eucharist, with its ritual consumption of Christ's blood, might have been a symbolic act pointing toward a hidden truth, that this blood, once shed, still flowed somewhere in the veins of men. The idea was heretical, dangerous, and seductive all at once. To suggest that Jesus had descendants was to challenge the very structure of the Church, the purity of its doctrine, and the authority it claimed from heaven itself. In whispered circles, it was said that the Grail guardians, those who sought to protect this living vessel, encoded their secret within art, architecture, and story. Gothic cathedrals became their silent gospel, every arch and window concealing layers of sacred geometry that hinted at something preserved. In France, the Templars were rumored to guard a secret relic too powerful for kings or popes. Some claimed it was the Grail itself. Others believed it was proof of Christ's bloodline, carried westward after the crucifixion by those who knew his truth must be hidden from the empire of priests. As the centuries passed, the line between myth and memory blurred. The Grail became both a quest and a riddle, a bridge between heaven and earth, faith and flesh. To some, it symbolized the soul's journey toward enlightenment. To others, it was the literal thread linking humanity to divinity. And in the cryptic writings of secret societies, especially those that emerged in medieval France, the idea of a royal bloodline of Christ became not only possible, but necessary. The missing key to the spiritual order of the world. By the time the Renaissance dawned, the Grail legend had absorbed layers of mystery and meaning. Painters began to encode subtle hints in their work. An open hand here, a chalice-shaped shadow there, the deliberate placement of figures that mirrored the geometry of the Last Supper. These were not random choices. They were the visual language of those who dared to hint that divine love had once taken human form, and that it had not vanished with the cross. The Church, however, could not tolerate such heresy. The mere suggestion that Christ might have married or fathered children struck at the heart of its power. If holiness could be inherited, if salvation ran in human veins, then the sacred intermediaries, priests, popes, bishops, would lose their hold over the soul of man. Thus, the Grail's transformation from relic to bloodline became more than a legend. It became a hidden war between revelation and repression, knowledge and control. And somewhere between myth and doctrine, between poetry and persecution, the question endured, unanswered yet unforgotten. Was the Holy Grail a cup or a family? The deeper scholars and seekers dug, the more the evidence seemed to scatter across old scrolls, forgotten tombs, and encrypted genealogies. The trail pointed towards southern France, where strange legends told of a foreign woman arriving by sea after the crucifixion. She carried something sacred, it was said, something she could not allow to fall into Roman hands. Locals called her the woman who wept at the tomb. As the camera pans across the windswept cliffs of Provence, her name echoes softly through time, Mary Magdalene. The woman history tried to erase, yet whose shadow stretches across centuries. And if she truly bore the secret of the Grail, the bloodline of Christ, then her story is not one of sin, but of legacy. The Grail, then, may never have been hidden in a castle or guarded by knights. Perhaps it walked among men, not as a relic to be found, but as a lineage to be preserved. The legend of the Holy Grail was not about what was lost, but who. In the heart of ancient Judea, amid Roman banners and desert winds, there stood a woman whose story would outlive empires, Mary Magdalene. For centuries, her name has been wrapped in layers of misunderstanding, reshaped by doctrine and legend alike. To some, she was the fallen sinner redeemed by Christ's mercy. To others, she was far more, the closest companion of Jesus, the keeper of his deepest truths, perhaps even the bearer of his blood. The Gospels that survive the early church's scrutiny reveal her in glimpses, standing at the foot of the cross when all others fled. She is the first to see the risen Christ, the first to be called by name from the silence of the tomb. That moment, Mary, carries a weight beyond words. It is intimate, almost tender, as if two souls recognize each other beyond death. And yet, within decades, her image was reshaped. The Church Fathers, uncomfortable with her prominence, began to conflate her with other women of sin and sorrow. The Magdalene became a symbol of repentance, not revelation. Her voice was dimmed, her role rewritten. But the fragments that escaped the censor's flame tell a different story. The Gospel of Mary, unearthed in Egypt in the late 19th century, portrays her not as a repentant sinner, but as a teacher, one whom the male disciples feared and resented for her closeness to Jesus. In that text, Peter questions why the Savior would speak privately to a woman. The answer, ascribed to Christ, is radical. That divine wisdom resides not in the body, but in the spirit. It was a message that challenged patriarchal power, and it may explain why her gospel was buried for nearly 2 millennia. If we trace these fragments through time, a tantalizing possibility emerges. Some scholars, theologians, and even mystics suggest that Mary Magdalene was not merely a disciple, but the wife or spiritual counterpart of Jesus, his consort in a sacred union meant to restore balance between the masculine and feminine principles of creation. In the context of Jewish custom, where a rabbi was expected to marry, this idea is not as implausible as it first seems. Yet for the early church, seeking to separate the divine from the flesh, such a claim was catastrophic. If Mary Magdalene was indeed his wife, and if she bore his child, that child would represent the living continuation of divine humanity, the fusion of heaven and earth. That child would be the sang real, the royal blood, the true Grail. And if the church feared anything, it was the loss of control over the narrative of salvation. A human lineage descending from Jesus would dethrone the priesthood, rendering every soul potentially sacred, every life a vessel of divine inheritance. Legends from southern France seem to whisper this possibility across the ages. In the ancient town of Saint-Omer, locals still tell of a woman arriving by sea, accompanied by 2 or 3 companions. She carried no possessions, only knowledge. Some versions of the legend call her Mary Magdalene, arriving after the crucifixion to escape persecution. She brought with her something so sacred that even centuries later, the church would veil it in myth. In nearby Provence, the cave of Saint Baume became her hermitage, a place where she is said to have lived out her life in contemplation, her tears carving paths into the stone. But within these stories, something strange persists, a thread of secrecy surrounding a holy family said to have continued her line in obscurity. Medieval troubadours, the poet-singers of Occitania, wove coded verses of the lost bride, the rose of the sea, and the mother of the Grail. To the untrained ear, they were songs of love. To initiates, they were maps to a forgotten truth, the continuation of Christ's bloodline through the Magdalene. Even the art of the time seems to echo this veiled reverence. In Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper, many have noted the figure seated to Christ's right, traditionally identified as John, bears strikingly feminine features. Her face, her posture, even the distance between her and Christ form a subtle V shape, long interpreted as a symbol of the sacred feminine. Could it be that Leonardo, a man obsessed with hidden meanings, was hinting at the suppressed truth that the Holy Grail sat not on the table, but beside him? This vision of Mary Magdalene, not as a penitent, but as a bearer of divine legacy, redefines the foundation of Christian myth. She becomes not a symbol of guilt, but of continuity, not a sinner redeemed by grace, but a partner in the sacred mission of creation itself. If Christ was the seed of heaven, she was the soil of earth, together forming the living Grail. Of course, to the Church of Rome, such ideas were intolerable. The Magdalene story had to be softened, her strength diminished, her voice silenced beneath centuries of dogma. Yet the mystery endured, carried in whispers through the Cathars of southern France, the Gnostics of Egypt, the Templars of Jerusalem. Across generations, they kept alive the heretical notion that divinity had walked not only in the heavens, but in the veins of humankind. The Magdalene, therefore, stands at the crossroads of faith and forbidden knowledge. She is both the key and the lock, the one who knew too much, and the one whose memory refused to die. Her image in red robes, clutching a vessel of alabaster, is more than a saintly portrait. It is a cipher. The vessel she carries, often mistaken for perfume or oil, may symbolize the womb, the container of sacred blood. If her story is true, then the Holy Grail was never a cup, nor a chalice hidden by knights. It was the continuation of a divine bond, a bloodline that might still ripple through the centuries, disguised within royal houses and forgotten families. And if that is so, then every attempt to erase her name only made her more eternal, the silent mother of a secret too vast to bury. As the centuries turned, her presence would echo across Europe, in symbols, in myths, in blood. The question is no longer whether Mary Magdalene carried something sacred from Jerusalem, but how far that sacred blood might have traveled. The Mediterranean lay before her like a mirror of flame. The sails of a small, weathered vessel caught the Mistral winds as it drifted westward, away from Jerusalem, away from empire and bloodshed, toward an unknown shore. Aboard this fragile ship, legend tells, was Mary Magdalene, no longer the woman of the Gospels, but a fugitive carrying the most precious secret in history. The sea, vast and indifferent, bore witness to her silence. It is said that she did not travel alone. The old Provençal stories speak of companions, Mary Salome, Mary Jacobi, and a young girl whose name the locals never learned. They arrived not as pilgrims or missionaries, but as exiles, refugees from the political and spiritual chaos that followed the crucifixion. To the Romans, they were irrelevant. To those who understood who she truly was, they were the last link to the divine made flesh. Their boat, according to the Legenda Aurea and later French traditions, landed near the mouth of the Rhone River, at a small settlement now known as Saint-Omer. Fishermen saw them step ashore, exhausted but unbroken, dressed in coarse garments yet with an air of quiet dignity. The locals, sensing something extraordinary, took them in, and from that moment, the story of the Magdalene became intertwined with the birth of Christianity in Gaul, and with a mystery that would shape European legend for centuries. The Church would later claim she came only to preach the gospel, to live her remaining years in solitude and prayer. But the oral traditions of Provence whisper something different, that she brought with her not merely words, but something sacred, hidden from both emperor and bishop. Some said it was a relic, a cup, a vial, or a scroll. Others claimed it was a child, the living heir of Christ himself. This, they said, was why she fled so far, beyond the reach of Rome's suspicion. In the centuries that followed, the landscape of southern France would become marked with the memory of her passage. The cave at Saint-Baume, nestled high in the mountains above Marseille, was said to be her refuge. Pilgrims who entered it spoke of a strange light that seemed to emanate from the walls, of a peace that felt older than faith itself. The air was thick with silence, the kind that feels like a prayer unspoken. There she is said to have wept, not for sin, but for memory. Her tears, legend says, polished the stone smooth. And from this cave, she became something more than a figure of devotion. She became a guardian of knowledge. The surrounding villages tell of how she instructed a few trusted followers, passing down words never written, secrets never meant for parchment. In the deep of the night, by candlelight and echoing chants, she shared what she had carried across the sea. Those who heard her teachings began to speak of a holy family that had once walked among men, and of a truth the world was not ready to bear. In the centuries to come, her influence would ripple outward like a hidden current beneath the surface of French Christianity. Her presence transformed the region of Provence into a spiritual epicenter. In nearby Rennes-le-Château and Languedoc, whispers would later emerge of sacred bloodlines, hidden tombs, and treasures buried beneath the old stones of churches. Though these tales would not surface until the Middle Ages, their roots trace back to the Magdalene's voyage. The seed she planted long before the Church of Rome declared her memory safe. But history, as it often does, tried to bury her beneath myth. By the time medieval chroniclers wrote of her, her story had been carefully softened, retold as a life of repentance, her tears framed as guilt rather than remembrance. The powerful image of a woman carrying the bloodline of Christ was far too dangerous for orthodoxy to endure. Yet, the people of Provence refused to forget. Each year, they reenacted her arrival, carrying statues of 3 women across the surf, their garments soaked in seawater and candlelight. The ritual persisted, defiant in its simplicity. The secret she brought, if one believes the whispers, was not only in the flesh, but in the wisdom she carried from the East. Gnostic fragments suggest that Jesus imparted to her the mysteries of creation, of spirit and matter intertwined. When she landed on the French shores, she brought this duality with her, a message that heaven and earth are one, and that the divine spark lies within humankind itself. In her teachings, later echoed in Cathar and Templar traditions, knowledge, gnosis, replaced blind faith as the key to salvation. It was a truth that would echo centuries later in secret orders, hidden beneath layers of symbolism. The Magdalene's arrival in Gaul thus became more than an act of escape. It was the founding moment of a hidden stream of Christianity, one that valued inner revelation over hierarchy, equality over authority, love over law. And in the hidden valleys of southern France, among the troubadours and heretics, that flame continued to burn long after the church declared extinguished. Yet even as we sift through the ruins of her legend, something more human lingers. Picture her standing on the French shore at dusk, hair tangled by the wind, the salt of the sea on her lips. She looks back toward the horizon, toward the land she left behind, carrying not just the memory of a man crucified, but perhaps the future of his line. Whether she bore his child or his teachings, she carried his essence, the living continuation of what the world believed had ended at Golgotha. In that moment, the myth becomes something more profound than history. It becomes a reflection of our endless yearning to believe that love transcends death, that truth survives empires, and that even in exile, the divine finds a way to endure. And so, the voyage to Gaul becomes not just a journey across the sea, but across time itself. From that fragile boat in the blue expanse of the Mediterranean, a legend was born, one that would one day draw knights, poets, and secret societies to her trail. The woman who fled Jerusalem did not escape into obscurity. She carried the spark of a forbidden revelation, and in the hills of Provence, that spark would one day ignite 1,000 years of hidden faith. Centuries after the Magdalene's arrival on the shores of Gaul, a new dynasty rose from the mist of ancient Europe, one cloaked in both glory and enigma. They were the Merovingians, the first royal house of what would become France. Their kings bore long, flowing hair said to shimmer like the sun, a mark of their sacred right to rule. Their symbol was not the cross, but the bee, an emblem of divine resurrection and eternal order. And from the moment they appeared, whispers followed them. These were no ordinary men. Their blood was different. The story begins with a legend, the tale of King Merovingian, the semi-mythical founder of the dynasty. His mother, Queen Bina, was said to have conceived him not by her husband, but by a strange creature from the sea, a being described as half-man, half-fish, emerging from the waves under a silver moon. To the church, this was dismissed as pagan nonsense. But to later mystics and esoteric scholars, it sounded eerily like an encoded story, a symbol of divine union, a child born of heaven and earth. Could this sea being have been a metaphor for the holy bloodline that arrived in Gaul generations earlier, the secret descendants of Christ and the Magdalene? As the Merovingians took power in the 5th century, they were unlike any other rulers of their time. They claimed their authority not from the Pope or the Empire, but from something far older, a blood right bestowed by divine inheritance. They ruled as warrior priests, performing rituals that blended ancient Celtic mysticism with early Christianity. Chroniclers noted their uncanny charisma, their reputation as healers, and their mysterious ability to unite tribes through sheer presence. To the people, their power felt sacred. To the church, it felt dangerous. The first of their great kings, Clovis I, converted to Christianity around 496 AD in a ceremony that reshaped European history. His baptism by Saint Remigius marked the beginning of the Christian kingdom of France, the eldest daughter of the Church. But the irony was not lost on those who understood the deeper story. The Church had not converted Clovis. It had absorbed him. By embracing the Merovingians, Rome sought to domesticate a lineage it could not destroy. Yet the Church's alliance with the Merovingians was uneasy. Beneath the surface, suspicion simmered. The Merovingians kept certain rites and traditions that defied orthodox control. They honored sacred symbols, the fleur-de-lis, the serpent, the rose, all ancient emblems of regeneration and blood. Their queens were often associated with prophecy and healing, their kings rumored to possess psychic insight. These were not just rulers. They were keepers of mystery that predated both crown and cross. It was during this time that the myth of the hidden bloodline began to crystallize. Chroniclers recorded genealogies with curious gaps and omissions, suggesting marriages and births that were deliberately concealed. Some medieval sources hinted that the Merovingian kings traced their lineage not to the gods of the north, but to a sacred line from the east. The implication was staggering, that the royal house of France was, in some way, descended from the same blood that flowed through the veins of Christ. By the 7th century, the Merovingians had become both powerful and problematic. Their autonomy from Rome made them targets. The Church, seeking greater influence, began to elevate the mayors of the palace, administrative officials who served under the kings but slowly usurped their power. The last true Merovingian, King Dagobert II, ruled with a sense of destiny. He was educated, devout, and deeply tied to the mystic traditions of southern France, the very region where Mary Magdalene had once walked. Dagobert's reign was brief but luminous. He strengthened ties with monastic orders in Gaul and maintained mysterious contact with the Visigoths of Septimania, a group known to guard ancient relics and secret texts. Some historians believe he was in possession of knowledge so dangerous that it cost him his life. In 679 AD, Dagobert II was assassinated, a spear through the eye, while hunting in the forest. His death was no mere accident. The Church quickly legitimized his successor and erased Dagobert's name from official histories. But legends refused to die. In the Languedoc region, tales persisted of Dagobert's surviving son, a child hidden away by loyal followers, spirited into the mountains to preserve the royal blood. Monks, knights, and later secret orders would all claim to be his descendants or guardians. Thus began the myth of the Rex Deus, the God Kings, those who carried within them the divine spark of the Nazarene line. Centuries later, in obscure archives and dusty manuscripts, cryptic references to this bloodline would resurface. A secret dossier known as the Prieur de Chaon, the Priory of Chaon, claimed to trace its origins to the guardians of the Merovingian heritage, protectors of the Grail family. Whether real or forged, these documents revived an ancient claim that the true heirs of Christ had once ruled France, and that their descendants might still walk among us. The symbolism of the Merovingians, their bees, their long hair, their sacred marriages, all took on new meaning through this lens. The bees, once thought mere emblems of industry, were ancient signs of resurrection. symbols of the soul's flight from death to immortality. The long hair, forbidden to be cut, represented divine strength and spiritual inheritance. And their queens, often named with variants of Mary or and, seem to echo the lineage of sacred feminine archetypes reaching back to the Magdalene herself. By the time the Carolingians rose to power, with Pepin the Short and his son Charlemagne, the Church had achieved what it long desired. The Merovingians were erased from history, labeled lazy kings, unworthy of remembrance. Yet in forgotten chapels and secret texts, the whisper endured. They were the keepers of the Grail. Today, the Merovingians remain one of history's most haunting enigmas. Kings who may have carried the blood of God himself, betrayed by those who feared the truth of their lineage. Their tombs lie scattered across France, marked by symbols no historian can fully decode. Bees carved in stone, roses entwined in crosses. A secret that has waited, patient, silent, for the world to remember. The world had changed since the Merovingians vanished from the chronicles. Empires rose, faith hardened into dogma, and Europe entered an age of crusades, an era where the sword and the cross marched together. But beneath the roar of holy wars and papal decrees, an older current stirred once more. It was the same secret that had fled Jerusalem with the Magdalene, the same bloodline that had once ruled through the Merovingians. Now, it found new guardians, men who wore white mantles marked with a red cross, and who would come to be known as the Knights Templar. Their story began in 1119, in the aftermath of the First Crusade. A small band of knights, led by Hugues de Payens, approached King Baldwin II of Jerusalem with a peculiar request: permission to take up residence on the Temple Mount, atop the ruins of Solomon's temple itself. Their official purpose was modest, to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. But their true mission, whispered among scholars and chroniclers, was far stranger. For nearly a decade, these 9 knights dug beneath the temple, venturing into tunnels sealed since ancient times. Contemporary records are silent on what they found, but legends speak of scrolls, relics, and artifacts too dangerous to reveal. Some claim they discovered the Ark of the Covenant, others the Holy Grail itself. Yet among esoteric circles, a more shocking theory emerged: that the Templars had uncovered proof of the sacred bloodline, documents or relics confirming that Jesus had descendants whose lineage had survived in secret through the centuries. Whatever they unearthed changed them. When the Templars re-emerged from their subterranean silence, they were no longer humble knights. Within decades, they became the most powerful organization in Christendom. Endorsed by the Pope, they amassed immense wealth, built fortresses across Europe, and established the first international banking system. Kings borrowed from them, and even monarchs knelt before their grand masters. But their power was not merely political. It was spiritual, even mystical. Their rituals, conducted in secrecy, carried echoes of forgotten Gnostic rites. They invoked divine wisdom, honored the sacred feminine, and spoke of a truth older than Rome. The Church looked on with growing unease. The Templars' independence was absolute. Their loyalty, it seemed, was to a mystery beyond papal comprehension. Rumors spread that they possessed a living grail, a bloodline protected through the centuries, tied to the lineage of Christ. In their hidden chapters, symbols of the rose, the chalice, and the cross intertwined. To initiates, these were not mere emblems of faith, but metaphors for divine continuity, for the union of heaven and earth in human form. Historians later noted strange coincidences. Many Templar strongholds were built in regions once sacred to the Merovingians, in Languedoc, in Provence, in Burgundy. Their seals bore cryptic imagery, two knights on a single horse, symbolizing duality and unity, and the Dome of the Rock, marking their origin at Solomon's Temple, the heart of the mystery. In France, the Templar commandery of Rennes-le-Château would one day become infamous for its own hidden treasures and coded symbols, reigniting speculation that the Templars had safeguarded the bloodline of Christ. Their reverence for the feminine divine was equally suspicious to the Church. Unlike Orthodox Christianity, which suppressed Mary Magdalene's legacy, the Templars seemed to honor her as the vessel of divine wisdom, Sophia, the feminine aspect of God. Within their chapels, secret carvings and frescoes depicted women holding chalices, stars, and serpents, ancient symbols of creation and rebirth. To the initiated, these images were not heresy, but homage. They were the keepers of the secret union, the sacred marriage between Christ and the Magdalene. But power, even sanctified power, draws fear. By the early 14th century, the Templars' influence rivaled that of kings and popes alike. They were untouchable until they were betrayed. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, under orders from King Philip IV of France, the Templars were arrested in a single, coordinated strike. Their leader, Jacques de Molay, was seized, their wealth confiscated, their order accused of blasphemy and witchcraft. The charges were grotesque: denying Christ, worshipping idols, practicing secret rites. Yet beneath the propaganda lay the true reason. They knew too much. For 7 years, the Templars were tortured into confession. Many broke, some died, but a few remained defiant. When Jacques de Molay was finally led to the stake in 1314, he proclaimed his innocence and cursed both king and pope, predicting their deaths within a year. His words proved true. Yet even as the flames rose around him, another legend was born. It was said that before their arrest, a group of Templars escaped with their greatest secret, sailing from the port of La Rochelle with chests of treasure and relics beyond price. Among these, some claimed, was the ultimate relic, the living record of the bloodline, the evidence of the Grail. In the centuries that followed, the Templars became more myth than memory, but traces of their secrets survived. In Masonic lodges, in Rosicrucian writings, in whispered genealogies linking noble families to a forgotten line of holy descent. The fleur-de-lis, once the Merovingian emblem, reappeared in their architecture. Their ruins were marked with crosses that merged into roses, suns that shone within circles, echoes of a doctrine that refused to die. To the Church, the Templars' destruction was a triumph. To those who read between the lines, it was a tragedy, the silencing of men who may have guarded humanity's most profound truth, that divinity had walked the earth not as an untouchable God, but as a family, a living bridge between heaven and flesh. And though the flames of Paris consumed the last Grand Master, his words lingered like a prophecy in the smoke. The truth we carried will never die. Somewhere across Europe, that truth went underground, hidden not in cathedrals or vaults, but in blood, in lineage, in stories disguised as legends. The Templars had fallen, but their purpose, to protect the sacred inheritance of the Nazarene, would live on in new forms, under new names, through centuries of silence and shadow. When the fires that consumed Jacques de Molay faded into the Parisian night, the world assumed the Templar order had been erased, its knights scattered, its wealth seized, its legacy reduced to ashes. But history rarely ends where official chronicles claim it does. Beneath the surface, in hidden valleys, in remote abbeys, and in noble courts that owed their rise to forgotten loyalties, something survived. The Templar secret, the mystery of the bloodline, lived on. In the years following the Purge of 1307, rumors spread across Europe that not all the Templars had been captured. Some escaped north, blending into Scottish and Iberian lands where royal power was weaker and church influence less absolute. In Scotland, under the protection of Robert the Bruce, excommunicated by the Pope, the exiled knights found sanctuary. It was there, according to legend, that remnants of the order helped secure Bruce's victory at Bannockburn in 1314, fighting under mysterious banners that bore the same red cross once condemned by Rome. To the victors, it was divine intervention. To those who knew the secret, it was the bloodline defending itself. Yet even in exile, the Templars' true treasure was not gold or relics. It was knowledge, genealogical, spiritual, and historical, the living thread connecting the divine to the mortal. Those who carried this legacy became something new, guardians of a sacred descent hidden within the veins of Europe's nobility. It is said that before their downfall, the Templars had transferred their most important records, coded parchments and genealogies, into the care of allied families in southern France. These included the St. Clairs of Rosslyn, the Blancheforts, and other houses tied by blood or oath to the ancient Merovingians. These families would become the silent stewards of a secret that could never be spoken aloud. In their castles and chapels, hidden symbols reappeared, roses entwined with crosses, pentagrams aligned with stars, and effigies of the Magdalene, the woman long erased from Scripture, yet immortal in stone. The St. Clairs, builders of the enigmatic Rosslyn Chapel, would later enshrine this legacy in carved stonework filled with pagan, Christian, and Templar imagery, a cathedral to the idea that divinity had once taken human form. Rosslyn Chapel became, in many eyes, the spiritual heir to the Temple of Solomon. Its arches bore carvings of corn, aloe, and exotic plants unknown to medieval Europe, signs, some claimed, that the Templars or their heirs had journeyed far beyond known lands, perhaps even to the New World. But more mysterious still were the faces, angels holding chalices, women cradling children beneath stars, and knights kneeling before the rose. To the uninitiated, they were mere decoration. To those who knew, they were a message. The bloodline endures. As centuries passed, whispers of this lineage resurfaced in curious places. During the Renaissance, scholars like Leonardo da Vinci encoded hints of the sacred feminine and the mystery of the Grail into their art. The Last Supper, for instance, shows not a bearded apostle beside Christ, but a feminine figure, serene, sorrowful, and unmistakably separate. Art historians debated for centuries whether this was Mary Magdalene. For initiates, there was no question. It was a quiet homage to the union that birthed the divine line, and to those who had protected it since the fall of the temple. The Church, of course, denied it all. The Magdalene remained a penitent sinner, the Templars heretics, and any claim of a divine bloodline blasphemy. Yet throughout Europe, secret societies began to emerge. Organizations cloaked in fraternity and ritual, their symbols echoing the old orders. The Freemasons, rising in the shadows of the 17th and 18th centuries, claimed descent from the builders of Solomon's Temple, an allegory that concealed far older roots. Their lodges bore symbols of the compass, the square, and the blazing star, metaphors for divine architecture and hidden truth. Among their ranks were nobles, scientists, philosophers, and, according to some accounts, descendants of those who had once sworn the Templar oath. These secret societies became the vessels through which the bloodline's memory endured. They spoke of enlightenment, liberty, and hidden wisdom, but beneath their esoteric philosophy lingered the old purpose: protection of the sacred heritage. Across Europe, certain families maintained genealogies that stretched back to the early medieval period, tracing obscure connections to the Merovingian kings. Though dismissed by official historians, these claims persisted in coded manuscripts, secret archives, and oral traditions passed from generation to generation. The idea of the Priory of Chaon, a supposed secret order preserving the bloodline of Christ, emerged from these shadows. Its earliest mentions appear in the 12th century, connected to the Abbey of Chaon in Jerusalem, itself a Templar stronghold. Later writings, some apocryphal, claim that this order continued underground, guiding the course of European politics from behind the veil, ensuring that the lineage, the living Grail, survived through chosen heirs. Even monarchs, it was said, were pawns in a game whose true players were invisible. What makes these legends so persistent is not their provability, but their resonance. Throughout history, power and divinity have always intertwined, kings ruling by the grace of God, empires claiming divine sanction. Yet the bloodline myth turned this hierarchy upside down. It suggested that divinity was not a distant power, but a living inheritance, that God had walked among humanity not as spirit alone, but as blood, lineage, and love. For those who embraced this belief, the Church's authority was rendered hollow. No priest, no pope could claim monopoly over salvation, because the divine was already incarnate in the human. And so, through secret codes, family crests, and hidden chapels, the bloodline endured in silence. Its guardians operated not as kings or knights, but as architects, scholars, and mystics, men and women who understood that the greatest truth must be hidden to survive. They left clues scattered across Europe, in the geometry of cathedrals, in the music of sacred chants, in the stars above Roslin's vaults. Each fragment, meaningless alone, formed part of a greater whole, a map pointing back to the union of the Magdalene and the Christ, to the blood that was divine. Even today, this mystery refuses to die. Historians dismiss it as myth, yet the symbols persist. The rose, the chalice, the Grail, the cross, they haunt our architecture, our literature, our dreams. Perhaps, as some have suggested, the power of the bloodline is not in its biological reality, but in the idea it represents, that the sacred is not confined to heaven, but flows through humanity itself. Still, for those who walk the old paths, through the ruins of Templar commanderies, through Roslin's carved corridors, through the forests of Languedoc where the last Cathars fell, there lingers a sense of presence, a pulse older than history. It is said that when the wind moves through those stones, it carries a whisper not of relics or conquest, but of remembrance. The lineage is not forgotten. The Grail is not lost. The blood still flows. In the quiet town of Rennes-le-Château, nestled among the misty hills of southern France, a mystery began to unfold that would ignite centuries of speculation. It was here in the 19th century that a humble village priest named Berenger Saunier stumbled upon something extraordinary. Parchments hidden in the hollow of an old altar pillar. Their discovery would lead to sudden wealth, secretive behavior, and rumors of a conspiracy stretching back to Christ himself. To understand what Saunier found, one must look further into the shadows, into the enigma of an ancient brotherhood known as the Priory of Chaon. According to scattered accounts, the Priory of Chaon claimed to be far older than any medieval church or modern order. Its roots, it is said, reached back to the time of the First Crusade, around the year 1099, the same era that birthed the Knights Templar. While the Templars were warriors and bankers, the priory was said to be something different, a secretive spiritual order devoted not to conquest, but to preservation, the guardians of a sacred lineage. Their symbol, the fleur-de-lis, appeared in the heraldry of French kings and Templar seals alike. To the unknowing eye, it was a mark of nobility. To initiates, it was a cipher of blood, the flower that hid the root of divine descent. Whispers of this order appear in medieval writings and resurfaced in encoded genealogies centuries later. The claim was astonishing, that the priory's mission was to protect the descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, the living heirs to a bloodline that once ruled as the Merovingian kings of early France. The idea suggested that beneath the surface of European history ran a hidden river of divine heritage, guiding and shaping the destinies of nations. For those who accepted this idea, history itself was not random. It was a grand, concealed narrative, one of exile, protection, and ultimate revelation. In the 12th century, as crusaders fought for Jerusalem, the priory supposedly operated in secret alongside the newly formed Knights Templar. The two were bound by purpose, but divided by method. The Templars protected the holy sites and relics. The priory protected the blood that made those relics sacred. When the Templars fell to the wrath of kings and popes, the priory faded into obscurity, its work too dangerous to name, its existence denied by every public chronicle. Yet, according to those who trace its shadow, the priory did not die. It went underground, weaving itself into the fabric of European nobility, the church, and even the arts. Its grandmasters, known as nautaniers, the helmsmen, were said to guide the order through the centuries. A list of these names, later discovered in mysterious documents, reads like a who's who of history's most brilliant minds. Leonardo da Vinci, Botticelli, Isaac Newton, Victor Hugo. Each one, according to legend, was entrusted not only with scientific or artistic genius, but with the guardianship of an ancient truth. Their works, examined closely, contain symbols of the Grail, the Rose, and the Magdalene, echoes of the same forbidden story. Whether the list was true or fabricated, it carried a message that resonated through time, that knowledge and divinity walk hand in hand, and that the sacred bloodline must be protected through intellect and art, not warfare. Then, in 1891, Berenger Saunier made his fateful discovery at Rennes-le-Château. The parchments he found, some believe, contained coded genealogies, proof that the descendants of Christ had survived and were protected by the Priory of Chaon. After finding them, Saunier's life changed overnight. He began to receive mysterious sums of money from unknown patrons, traveled to Paris, and mingled with powerful figures in secret. His once crumbling church was suddenly adorned with bizarre and symbol-laden decorations, demonic statues, hidden inscriptions, and an altar bearing the words, "By this sign, you will conquer." The church had no explanation for Saunier's transformation, but the locals whispered that he had stumbled upon the greatest secret in Christendom, one that could shake the foundations of the Vatican itself. He built lavish gardens, entertained guests of influence, and spent fortunes that no priest could possibly earn. When questioned, he smiled and said little. When he died, he took his secret with him, leaving behind symbols and clues that fueled endless theories. Some claimed he had blackmailed the church with proof of Christ's bloodline. Others believed he had joined the priory itself, sworn to silence in exchange for protection. In 1956, the Priory of Chaon resurfaced publicly, registered as a small association in France. But this was no ordinary club. The documents that soon emerged in its name, called the Dossier's Secrets, claimed to contain the lineage of Christ's descendants, tracing the bloodline through centuries of French kings. Deposited quietly in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, these papers listed the priory's grandmasters, the hidden genealogies, and the connection to the Merovingians. Though later accused of being an elaborate hoax, the documents reignited the legend, linking Saunier's discovery, the Templars, and the sacred bloodline into one continuous thread. Whether the priory was real or an invention, its myth struck a deep chord. The idea that an invisible brotherhood had shaped history, protecting a truth too dangerous to reveal, fascinated scholars and dreamers alike. Writers like Gérard de Sade and later researchers took up the trail, suggesting that this hidden order had influenced revolutions, guided monarchs, and preserved secret knowledge within art and architecture. To them, the priory was not just a conspiracy, it was the unseen architect of Europe's destiny. What gave the legend such endurance was its harmony of opposites: faith and secrecy, science and spirituality, divine heritage and human frailty. In a world dominated by institutions of control, the notion of a secret brotherhood preserving the truth of human divinity was intoxicating. It turned history into a grand puzzle, each clue a fragment of a forgotten truth. The more one searched, the more the patterns seemed to appear. Templar symbols in Gothic cathedrals, Magdalene effigies in French chapels, and cryptic Latin mottos carved into tombs of ancient families. But if the priory truly existed, what was its purpose now? Some believe it still watches silently, a shadow network protecting descendants whose blood carries the memory of divinity. Others argue that its mission was never literal, but symbolic, to remind humankind that the sacred resides within the flesh, not beyond it. Either way, the legend endures because it speaks to an ancient longing, the desire to bridge heaven and earth, to touch the divine through our own humanity. In the end, whether the priory of Chaon was fact, fabrication, or something in between, its story reveals the one truth that refuses to die: power fears mystery. For if the divine walked among us as man, if God's blood mingled with our own, then every kingdom, every church, every law built on hierarchy would tremble. And perhaps that is why the priory, real or imagined, has remained silent for so long. Its secret is not merely one of blood, but of liberation, the greatest heresy of all. In the centuries that followed the fall of the Templars, Europe seemed to move on. Kingdoms rose and fell, churches divided, and new empires claimed divine right to rule. Yet beneath the surface of this turbulent history, a different lineage moved quietly, unseen but not inactive. If the priory of Chaon truly existed, if the Templar secrets had survived, then the sacred bloodline, the descendants of Christ and Mary Magdalene, had not perished. They had gone into exile. Hidden in plain sight, they watched history unfold, their existence hinted at in fragments, myths, and genealogies deliberately obscured by time. Southern France remained the heart of this enigma. In the rugged hills of Languedoc, where the Cathars once preached of divine duality and the corruption of Rome, the remnants of a secret faith lingered. Families who had escaped the church's purges in the 13th century still carried strange symbols in their coats of arms: roses, bees, and stars arranged in cryptic patterns. Local legends told of the red-haired ones, noble lineages said to descend from the ancient kings of the Franks, the Merovingians. The most enigmatic of these was Dagobert II, a king betrayed and murdered in the 7th century, whose bloodline was said to have vanished or been hidden. According to certain genealogies, it did not die. It merged with those who carried the Grail. From this fusion of myth and memory grew a network of families who seemed to move through history as if guided by invisible hands. The Blancheforts, the Hop Powells, the the St. Clairs, and others tied by marriage or symbol were linked to the same southern lands where Saunier would later uncover his secrets. They held land that once belonged to Templars, built churches dedicated to the Magdalene, and passed down heirlooms inscribed with strange Latin phrases, et in Arcadia ego non nobis domini, in hoc signo vinces. To most, these were pious mottos. To a few, they were coded affirmations of a bloodline that refused to die. During the Renaissance, when the Church's grip began to loosen, the hidden heirs seemed to stir. Artists and thinkers began encoding veiled references to a feminine divinity and to sacred descent. Leonardo da Vinci's Virgin of the Rocks, Botticelli's Primavera, and later, Poussin's mysterious Shepherds of Arcadia all contained the same subtle geometry, the same hint of guardianship. Poussin's painting, especially, became a lightning rod for speculation centuries later. The phrase on the tomb, et in Arcadia ego, even in Arcadia I am, seemed to speak of death, yet some interpreted it differently, a code for presence, continuity, and secret survival. In 1656, a letter written by the French antiquarian Nicolas Poussin to his friend the Abbé Fouquet carried a cryptic warning. He mentioned a secret that Poussin would communicate by word of mouth only, and which would give you, if learned, control over kings. Those words, later found in the archives of the Fouquet family, hinted that the mystery was not merely artistic but political, that it involved a truth powerful enough to shift thrones. Some researchers believe that Poussin's painting concealed the location of a tomb, perhaps even the resting place of the Magdalene or of the Merovingian heirs themselves. As France entered the Age of Enlightenment, the bloodline seemed to resurface again, this time clothed in philosophy and science rather than faith. The idea of hidden knowledge, of divine inheritance through reason rather than dogma, resonated in Masonic circles and among Rosicrucians. Many of their founders traced symbolic lineages to the same region of France, and their rituals were steeped in Templar and priory imagery: the rose, the cross, the chalice, the compass. In these secret societies, the notion of an inner, sacred truth survived under the guise of esoteric enlightenment. Some whispered that their lodges preserved more than symbols, that among them still moved those who bore the blood itself. Then came the revolutions. In France, in America, across Europe, monarchies fell, empires burned, and old orders collapsed. The ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity seemed to tear down divine hierarchy once and for all. But to some observers, this was not chaos. It was destiny. They claimed the heirs of the Grail had finally fulfilled their purpose, to awaken the divine within humanity, to bring heaven down to earth through enlightenment and freedom. These revolutions, they said, were not accidents of politics, but the slow blooming of an idea planted long ago, that every person carries a spark of the divine blood. And yet, the literal question remained, where were the heirs? If the Priory of Chaon had guarded their survival, where had they gone? In the 18th and 19th centuries, genealogical charts began to appear in secret archives, tracing the bloodline through obscure noble families, the Plantards, the Habsburg-Lorraines, the St. Clairs, the Montpels. Pierre Plantard, a 20th century figure who claimed descent from Dagobert II, asserted that his ancestors had been protectors of the Grail bloodline, and that the Priory of Chaon had preserved their memory for nearly 1,000 years. Though historians dismissed Plantard's claims as a hoax, the documents associated with the story, the same dossier secrets that mention Leonardo da Vinci, wove his name into a myth that refused to die. It is tempting to write these stories off as fabrications, yet the coincidences remain haunting. The same families tied to Plantard appear again and again in medieval archives, often associated with Templar lands, Magdalene dedications, and secretive marriages between southern French nobility and northern Crusader houses. In the genealogies of Europe, names echo like refrains: Dagobert, Blanchefort, St. Clair, Rochefort. Even when historical evidence is thin, the persistence of these links gives the legend a strange gravity. As modern historians dismiss the idea of a literal bloodline, others suggest the story was never meant to be purely genetic. The heirs of the Grail, they argue, represent not a dynasty of flesh, but a lineage of spirit. Men and women through history who carried the knowledge of divine immanence, the belief that the sacred is human, not separate. From the Cathars to the mystics of the Renaissance, from the philosophers of the Enlightenment to the dreamers of the modern age, this spiritual bloodline flows unseen. Its heirs are not kings, but keepers of an idea. That love, not dogma, is the true Grail. Still, in the lonely valleys of southern France, the legend of the physical bloodline persists. Pilgrims walk to the grotto of Saint Baume, where tradition says Mary Magdalene lived her last years in exile, her tears turning stone into crystal. Local tales speak of red-haired pilgrims who visit once each generation, leaving no name but bearing the same features: green eyes, fair skin, and unbroken gaze. Whether these are descendants or devotees, no one knows. But the belief endures that somewhere, hidden among us, walks the living memory of the Grail. Perhaps that is the greatest truth behind the legend. Every age needs its hidden heirs, not to rule empires, but to remind humanity that the divine once chose to dwell among us and still does. Whether in blood or in spirit, the Grail endures, carried not in chalices of gold, but in the hearts of those who remember. Long before the Church's cathedrals rose skyward, before the creeds and councils defined who was holy and who was heretic, the earliest followers of Christ spoke of a balance, of the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine, joined in divine harmony. But somewhere along the turbulent road of history, that balance was severed. The woman who once stood beside the Messiah as his companion, equal, and witness was cast down, rewritten as a sinner, erased from Scripture, and buried beneath centuries of patriarchal silence. That woman was Mary Magdalene, and if the legends of the Holy Grail hold any truth, she was far more than a disciple. She was the vessel, the living chalice, the mother of the bloodline. In the canonical Gospels, Mary Magdalene appears as one of Christ's closest followers, the first to witness his resurrection, the first to be called by name after death. Yet in later centuries, church tradition recast her as a prostitute, a repentant sinner redeemed by Christ's mercy, a distortion that scholars now admit was a deliberate conflation of multiple women into one. This rebranding was not accidental. It served to erase her authority, to silence the divine feminine from Christian theology. In doing so, the Church replaced partnership with hierarchy, turning the union of sacred man and sacred woman into a story of domination and repentance. But in the hidden texts, the ones buried in deserts and caves, the Apocrypha known only to early sects, another picture emerges. The Gospel of Mary, discovered in the 19th century in Egypt, portrays Magdalene not as a fallen woman, but as the wisest of the apostles. When the male disciples despair after Christ's death, it is she who comforts them, reminding them of his teachings of spirit and unity. Peter, jealous of her closeness to the Master, protests, "Did he really speak privately with a woman and not openly to us?" To which Levi replies, "Surely the Savior knew her very well." That is why he loved her more than us. These lines, buried for nearly 2 millennia, hint at a truth the early church found too dangerous to preserve. If Christ and Mary Magdalene shared more than spiritual intimacy, if they were partners, husband and wife, or even parents, then the Holy Grail ceases to be a cup and becomes something far more radical. The womb, the vessel of divine life. The Grail, in this reading, is not an object to be found, but a symbol of the divine feminine, the sacred power of creation itself. To acknowledge this would mean acknowledging that the divine resides not in a distant heaven, but within the living body of woman, a truth that undermined the Church's authority over salvation and the body alike. And yet, the imagery of the feminine divine never vanished completely. In the Gothic cathedrals of France, Notre Dame, Our Lady, the architecture itself seems to honor her. The rose windows, shaped like mandalas, reflect her symbol, the rose, the eternal flower of hidden wisdom. Beneath these windows, carved into stone, are faces that resemble neither saints nor angels, but human women, serene, sorrowful, eternal. Some scholars have argued that the builders of these cathedrals, many of whom were associated with the Templars and early Masonic guilds, encoded a silent devotion to the Magdalene within their art. Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, too, bears this mark. Among its carvings are not only Christian symbols, but images of fertility, growth, and the Earth Mother, figures found in pagan temples long before the birth of Christianity. At the heart of Rosslyn lies a column known as the Apprentice Pillar, intricately carved with spirals of vines and flowers, symbolizing life springing from hidden roots. To many, this is a secret ode to the feminine principle, the creative force through which divinity expresses itself in the world. The Cathars, who flourished in southern France during the 12th and 13th centuries, may have inherited fragments of this older wisdom. They preached that the Church of Rome was corrupt, that the true divine lay in balance and purity. They revered the concept of Sophia, divine wisdom, often equating her with the Magdalene herself. To them, the Holy Spirit was feminine, the eternal consort of God. For this belief, the Cathars were hunted, massacred, and erased. The Church called them heretics. But in their songs and rituals, the memory of the sacred feminine endured, whispering the same message the Magdalene had once spoken, that spirit and flesh are not enemies, but reflections of each other. Through the Renaissance, the Magdalene's image began to re-emerge, in art, in philosophy, in secret. Painters like Titian and Donatello depicted her not as a penitent sinner, but as a radiant, contemplative woman wrapped in red, the color of blood and passion. The red rose and the chalice became her symbols, blending seamlessly with Templar iconography. Even the word Rosicrucian, rose and cross, carries her hidden signature, the union of the feminine and the divine. In this reinterpretation, the Grail legends take on new meaning. The knight's quest is not for an external object, but for internal reconciliation, the rediscovery of the sacred feminine within himself and the world. The Grail is both the Magdalene and what she represents: compassion, wisdom, creation, and divine love. The knights who guarded it were not merely protecting a bloodline. They were preserving a philosophy, one that taught that divinity flows through the union of opposites, through love itself. Even today, remnants of the Magdalene's worship can be found in the landscapes of southern France. Pilgrims visit the grotto at Saint-Baume, where legend says she lived in meditation, her tears forming crystals in the rock. In Provence, small chapels bear her name, their altars adorned not with the crucifix, but with carvings of roses and stars. To those who seek her, the air feels charged with something ancient, as though the earth itself remembers what history tried to erase. In modern scholarship, the rediscovery of the Magdalene's true story has become a quiet revolution. Feminist theologians, historians, and spiritual seekers alike have begun to reassemble the fragments, revealing a woman who is not a sinner, but a teacher, perhaps even the first priest of a forgotten tradition. She stands as a symbol of all that patriarchal religion sought to suppress: the power of birth, emotion, intuition, and sacred equality. If Christ represents the divine made flesh, then Mary Magdalene represents the divine made human, the spirit embodied in love, compassion, and continuity. Together, they form a complete circle, the sacred marriage of heaven and earth. And if, as some claim, their union gave birth to a bloodline, then that bloodline's true meaning is not merely biological, but metaphysical. It is the inheritance of every soul that dares to see divinity not as distant or exclusive, but as living, breathing, and feminine. Perhaps this is the greatest secret of all, that the Holy Grail has never been lost because it was never an object. It was a person, a principle, a truth buried beneath dogma. The Magdalene is not only the keeper of Christ's blood, but of the forgotten half of God. And so, in every rose that blooms, in every woman who dares to speak truth against silence, the Grail still lives. Beneath the soaring arches of medieval cathedrals, artisans carved roses into stone and painted strange vessels in the hands of angels. The Holy Grail, a cup, a chalice, or perhaps something far less tangible, began to haunt the imagination of Christendom. But what if the Grail was never meant to be found in a church or hidden in a mountain cave? What if it was not an object at all, but a bloodline? The earliest whispers came from the 12th century, woven through the verses of poets who claimed divine inspiration. In Chrétien de Troyes' unfinished poem Perceval, Le Conte du Graal, the mysterious Grail first appeared, not as a golden cup, but as a radiant object carried by a maiden, glowing with otherworldly light. Later storytellers, from Robert de Boron to Wolfram von Eschenbach, reshaped it into a holy vessel that had caught the blood of Christ at his crucifixion. Yet, as the myths evolved, the symbols seemed to move from the realm of relics to that of secrets. Each retelling hinted that the Grail's true power lay not in stone or metal, but in what it contained. Among those who read between the lines was a quiet brotherhood of scholars and mystics. They noted how the word sangreal, Holy Grail in Old French, could also be divided as sang-real, meaning royal blood. This linguistic twist transformed the legend overnight. Could the Grail be a coded message about divine lineage, the blood of Christ continuing through generations? Suddenly, the sacred cup became a metaphor for something forbidden, a human continuation of the divine. If the Grail symbolized blood and not simply wine, then the Christian mysteries took on a shocking new dimension. The Eucharist, with its ritual consumption of Christ's blood, might have been a symbolic act pointing toward a hidden truth, that this blood, once shed, still flowed somewhere in the veins of men. The idea was heretical, dangerous, and seductive all at once. To suggest that Jesus had descendants was to challenge the very structure of the Church, the purity of its doctrine, and the authority it claimed from heaven itself. In whispered circles, it was said that the Grail Guardians, those who sought to protect this living vessel, encoded their secret within art, architecture, and story. Gothic cathedrals became their silent gospel, every arch and window concealing layers of sacred geometry that hinted at something preserved. In France, the Templars were rumored to guard a secret relic too powerful for kings or popes. Some claimed it was the Grail itself. Others believed it was proof of Christ's bloodline, carried westward after the crucifixion by those who knew his truth must be hidden from the empire of priests. As the centuries passed, the line between myth and memory blurred. The Grail became both a quest and a riddle, a bridge between heaven and earth, faith and flesh. To some, it symbolized the soul's journey toward enlightenment. To others, it was the literal thread linking humanity to divinity. And in the cryptic writings of secret societies, especially those that emerged in medieval France, the idea of a royal bloodline of Christ became not only possible, but necessary. The missing key to the spiritual order of the world. By the time the Renaissance dawned, the Grail legend had absorbed layers of mystery and meaning. Painters began to encode subtle hints in their work. An open hand here, a chalice-shaped shadow there, the deliberate placement of figures that mirrored the geometry of the Last Supper. These were not random choices. They were the visual language of those who dared to hint that divine love had once taken human form, and that it had not vanished with the cross. The Church, however, could not tolerate such heresy. The mere suggestion that Christ might have married or fathered children struck at the heart of its power. If holiness could be inherited, if salvation ran in human veins, then the sacred intermediaries, priests, popes, bishops, would lose their hold over the soul of man. Thus, the Grail's transformation from relic to bloodline became more than a legend. It became a hidden war between revelation and repression, knowledge and control. And somewhere between myth and doctrine, between poetry and persecution, the question endured, unanswered yet unforgotten. Was the Holy Grail a cup or a family? The deeper scholars and seekers dug, the more the evidence seemed to scatter across old scrolls, forgotten tombs, and encrypted genealogies. The trail pointed towards southern France, where strange legends told of a foreign woman arriving by sea after the crucifixion. She carried something sacred, it was said, something she could not allow to fall into Roman hands. Locals called her the woman who wept at the tomb. As the camera pans across the windswept cliffs of Provence, her name echoes softly through time, Mary Magdalene. The woman history tried to erase, yet whose shadow stretches across centuries. And if she truly bore the secret of the Grail, the bloodline of Christ, then her story is not one of sin, but of legacy. The Grail, then, may never have been hidden in a castle or guarded by knights. Perhaps it walked among men, not as a relic to be found, but as a lineage to be preserved. The legend of the Holy Grail was not about what was lost, but who. If the priory truly existed, it would have been the most elusive of all orders, its members bound by secrecy not to protect an artifact, but a bloodline. The dossier's secrets, discovered in the 1960s in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, listed genealogies connecting the Merovingian kings of early medieval France to the supposed descendants of Christ. The Merovingians, particularly King Dagobert II, were believed to possess a divine right unlike any other, not conferred by the Church, but inherited by blood. Their symbols, the fleur-de-lis, the bee, and the serpent, recur in esoteric art and heraldry, each hinting at something ancient and sacred. The Church's uneasy relationship with these kings and their sudden decline in the 7th century only deepens the mystery. Some theories claim that when Dagobert's line was overthrown, the Priory of Chaon went underground, preserving the lineage through secret marriages and alliances with noble houses. Over time, this bloodline allegedly intertwined with European royalty, subtly shaping the political landscape of medieval Christendom. To protect this truth, the priory orchestrated a web of symbolism that stretched across architecture, literature, and art. Cathedrals, stained glass, and manuscripts became coded testaments to a hidden heritage. The Templar cross, the rose, and the chalice all became emblems of remembrance for those who knew the secret. Whether historical or mythological, the idea of a priory guiding history from the shadows exerts a magnetic pull. It suggests that the visible world, kings, popes, empires, is merely the outer shell of a deeper narrative, one where divine heritage walks hidden among men, shaping events not through power, but through preservation. To the initiated, history itself becomes a sacred drama, a veiled continuation of the gospel story, stretching across centuries. When the Templars were destroyed in 1307, accused of heresy and worshipping idols, some believe it was not only greed or fear that motivated the Church, but a desperate attempt to extinguish what the Templars had uncovered. Yet fragments of their knowledge survived, scattered across Europe. Secret Masonic rites, alchemical manuscripts, and Rosicrucian texts all echo the same theme. A hidden lineage, a secret union of divine masculine and feminine, preserved through generations. Each group may have inherited a portion of the original Grail secret, fragments of a greater whole, intentionally obscured to protect its truth. Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper is often cited as one such coded artifact. The figure beside Christ, long assumed to be the Apostle John, bears features unmistakably feminine. Her posture, her expression, her red robes, all mirror the iconography of the Magdalene. Between her and Christ, a V-shaped gap forms, the ancient symbol of the feminine womb, the vessel. Whether intentional or not, this imagery embodies the union of opposites, the sacred balance long erased from doctrine. Leonardo's inclusion of such symbols aligns with the priory's alleged tradition of embedding hidden truths within works of genius. Yet perhaps the greatest enigma lies not in art or bloodlines, but in the question itself. Why preserve this secret for so long? If the bloodline truly exists, it may have been safeguarded not for political gain, but for what it represents. The enduring truth that divinity and humanity are intertwined. The Grail lineage symbolizes more than physical descent. It represents a living transmission of knowledge, compassion, and sacred balance passed from age to age. The priory's guardianship, then, is not about hiding power, but ensuring that this truth reemerges when humanity is ready to receive it. In every age, whispers of the priory resurface, in the intrigues of Renaissance courts, in the poetry of secret societies, in the architecture of Paris itself. Even today, beneath the foundations of churches and beneath the veils of myth, the same question stirs. Does the blood of the divine still flow in human veins? If so, the Grail is not a relic of the past, but a living mystery, walking among us, unseen, its guardians bound by silence, its purpose yet unfulfilled. In the dim corridors of early medieval Europe, long before the crowns of France and England gleamed beneath the weight of divine right, a dynasty rose whose very existence seemed to shimmer with myth. They were the Merovingians, a line of Frankish kings who ruled Gaul from the 5th to the 8th centuries. Their story, half history and half enigma, would later become one of the most crucial threads in the web of the Grail mystery. For hidden beneath the chronicles of their rule lies a claim so profound it threatens to reshape both history and theology, that the Merovingians were not merely kings, but descendants of a sacred bloodline, the blood of Christ himself. The saga begins with Merovec, the semi-legendary founder from whom the dynasty takes its name. Chroniclers tell us that Merovech was conceived in mystery. His mother, while swimming in the sea, encountered a strange beast of the deep and afterward bore a child marked by otherworldly destiny. Historians have long debated whether this tale was symbolic, but for the believers in sacred lineage, it was no myth at all. It was a code, a veiled way of saying that divine blood had entered the human world through a lineage both holy and concealed. By the 6th century, Merovech's descendants ruled over a powerful Frankish realm. Among them was King Clovis I, who converted to Christianity after a miraculous victory in battle. His baptism marked the fusion of faith and kingship, but for some, it was also the moment when divine legitimacy returned to the throne of man. The Church, eager to sanctify royal authority, blessed the Merovingians. Yet it also grew wary, for their rule was marked by strange customs. Long, uncut hair, symbolizing sacred power, cryptic symbols such as the bee and the serpent, and a sense of independence from Rome's control. These kings seemed less like servants of the Church and more like heirs to an older, hidden covenant. In time, whispers began to circulate that the Merovingians' right to rule was not bestowed by papal decree, but inherited by blood, a holy blood. The Church's endorsement, once convenient, now became dangerous. If the Merovingians' sanctity came from their lineage, a lineage stretching back to the Holy Family, then Rome's spiritual monopoly was meaningless. Thus began a subtle and enduring conflict between throne and altar, between blood and blessing. It was during the reign of Dagobert II, one of the last true Merovingian kings, that this conflict reached its climax. Dagobert was said to possess knowledge forbidden to most men, ancestral secrets that linked his blood to something sacred. He was a reformer, a ruler of compassion and mystery, favoring the south of France, the same region where, centuries earlier, Mary Magdalene was believed to have found refuge. According to later legends and secret documents, Dagobert's line was destined to carry the Grail, not as a cup, but as living flesh. In 679 CE, Dagobert II was assassinated under murky circumstances, stabbed through the eye while hunting. Official history marks his death as political intrigue, yet whispers of conspiracy abound. Some claim the Church, fearful of what Dagobert represented, sanctioned his death to extinguish the sacred line. Others believe his descendants survived, spirited away into the mountains of the Languedoc by loyal protectors, the earliest predecessors of the Priory of Chaon. In the centuries that followed, the Carolingians, led by the famous Charles Martel and later Charlemagne, rose to replace the Merovingians. But unlike their predecessors, their rule was tightly bound to papal authority. The age of sacred kingship gave way to an age of sanctioned monarchy. Yet among the shadows of monastic libraries and the archives of hidden orders, the legend of Dagobert's bloodline endured. His descendants, the lost heirs, became the beating heart of the Grail myth. Centuries later, the secret would resurface in cryptic documents, in genealogies that seemed to defy time. The dossier's secrets discovered in the 20th century claimed that the Merovingian line did not vanish but continued under new names, weaving through noble houses like the Plantard, the St. Clair, and even Habsburg. The document's authenticity remains debated, but its implications are staggering. If true, it means that the blood of Christ, the very essence of the Holy Grail, flows through the veins of modern royalty. The symbols of the Merovingians themselves became clues in this enduring mystery. The fleur-de-lis, which adorns the banners of French kings, was not merely a decorative emblem, but a stylized iris, a flower associated with purity, resurrection, and the divine feminine. The bee, often seen in Merovingian tombs, symbolized immortality and resurrection, traits linked to divine descent. Napoleon himself, when he sought to legitimize his empire, chose the bee as his emblem, claiming to revive the holy legacy of the Merovingian kings. Whether through coincidence or design, history seemed unable to erase their shadow. Their royal tombs, scattered across France, bear carvings of roses, serpents, and chalices, the same motifs that later defined the Grail legends. In St. Dagobert's shrine, there are whispers of secret chambers and lost inscriptions that once proclaimed his divine right. And in the hills of Rennes-le-Château, strange discoveries, gold crosses, encoded parchments, cryptic Latin, have fueled speculation that the secret of the Merovingians was never truly buried. But beyond relics and inscriptions lies a deeper mystery. Why would the idea of a sacred bloodline matter so much? Because it reverses the hierarchy of faith. It declares that divinity is not distant, but immanent, that the divine flows through humanity, not above it. The Merovingians, in this light, become symbols of a suppressed truth, that the kingdom of God is not ruled by popes or emperors, but by those who carry within them the living spark of the divine. The Church, for all its power, could not fully erase this notion. It re-emerged again and again, in troubadour songs, in alchemical texts, in Rosicrucian manifestos. Each time, it was disguised, wrapped in allegory, coded in myth. But its heart remained the same, a promise that the blood of Christ was not lost to the ages, but continued, hidden in plain sight, awaiting rediscovery. As the centuries passed, the Merovingians faded into the footnotes of history, their memory blurred by conquest and reformation. Yet for those who look closely, the pattern remains. Their legacy runs like a vein of gold beneath the stone of Europe's cathedrals, beneath coats of arms, beneath forgotten songs of courtly love. And at the center of it all lies a single, haunting question. If the Merovingians were the heirs of the holy blood, what became of their descendants? The answer, as the legend goes, was carefully preserved, protected by the Priory of Chaon, hidden within symbols that only the initiated could decode. The trail now leads us to a new chapter, where myth bleeds into conspiracy and faith intertwines with forbidden history. For in the shadowed hills of southern France, beneath the whispers of ancient stones, lies the next piece of the Grail's riddle, a secret that will take us into the heart of one of history's most enigmatic villages, Rennes-le-Château. High on a windswept hill in the Languedoc region of southern France lies a tiny village, quiet, remote, and almost forgotten by time. Its name is Rennes-le-Château, and if you were to pass through it today, you might see little more than a church, a handful of houses, and the ruins of an old castle crumbling beneath the French sun. Yet beneath this silence lies one of the most persistent and unsettling mysteries in modern history. For within this unassuming village, a priest once discovered something that would change his life, rewrite his faith, and ignite a century of speculation about hidden treasure, secret societies, and the bloodline of Christ. The story begins in the late 19th century with a man named Berenger Saunière, a parish priest appointed to Rennes-le-Château in 1885. The church he inherited, dedicated to Mary Magdalene, was small, poor, and falling apart, hardly the kind of place to attract attention. Yet within a few years, Saunière had transformed both the church and his own fortunes beyond comprehension. From destitute cleric to a man of immense wealth, he renovated the chapel in bizarre, symbolic ways, built a lavish villa, and constructed a grand tower overlooking the valley, the Tour Magdala, named after Magdalene herself. His sudden riches and eccentric behavior soon drew the curiosity and suspicion of everyone who heard his tale. According to local accounts, during the restoration of the church in 1891, Saunier discovered several ancient parchments hidden inside a hollow pillar supporting the altar. These documents, reportedly containing cryptic genealogies and coded messages, were unlike anything seen before. Some versions claim they traced royal lineages reaching back to the Merovingian kings, and beyond them, to Christ and Mary Magdalene. Others suggest they contained clues to a treasure buried by the Templars or the Cathars centuries earlier. Whatever the truth, Saunier immediately traveled to Paris, where he met with influential figures within the church and, allegedly, members of secret societies. When he returned, he was no longer a poor priest. The transformations that followed were extraordinary. Saunier began spending immense sums of money, far beyond any clerical salary, on elaborate renovations filled with strange and unsettling imagery. The church's entrance was guarded by a demonic statue of Asmodeus, the demon of secrets and hidden treasure. The Latin inscriptions he commissioned twisted biblical verses into cryptic warnings. "This place is terrible," one read. Another, "By this sign you shall conquer." Inside the chapel, depictions of saints and angels were subtly altered. Magdalene appeared not as a repentant sinner, but as a revered figure, crowned and serene. The Stations of the Cross depicted peculiar details, as if Saunier had embedded a code within holy art. Visitors began to whisper that the priest had uncovered more than gold, perhaps a truth the church had buried long ago. When questioned about his wealth, Saunier offered vague answers, claiming that donations from friends or private patrons funded his projects. But his actions grew stranger. He built secret rooms, tunnels, and an underground crypt. He threw lavish gatherings for select guests and kept meticulous ledgers filled with names and numbers that made little sense. In his final years, isolated and paranoid, Saunier refused to reveal the source of his fortune. When he died in 1917, the priest who heard his last confession reportedly left the house pale and shaken and refused to speak of what Saunier had said ever again. After his death, his loyal housekeeper, Marie de Narnaud, inherited his estate. She guarded his papers and secrets until her own death decades later. Before she passed, she is said to have whispered to a friend, "All of this, the treasure, the secret, it is beyond anything you can imagine. People will never be ready for it." Her words only deepened the enigma. The legend of Rennes-le-Château might have faded into obscurity if not for a series of coincidences and discoveries that brought it roaring back into the public eye. In the 1960s, the dossier's secrets appeared in Paris, a collection of documents claiming to detail the lineage of the Priory of Chaon, a secret society allegedly charged with protecting the descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. These files mentioned Rennes-le-Château repeatedly, naming Saunier as a guardian of this sacred truth. The implication was staggering, that he had found proof of the holy blood, the living descendants of Christ, and had been paid to keep it hidden. From that moment, the village became a magnet for seekers and scholars alike. Archaeologists, historians, mystics, and conspiracy theorists descended upon its hills. Some believed Saunier's wealth came from Templar gold, others that he had uncovered the lost treasure of the Cathars, hidden after the fall of Montségur. Yet the most enduring theory remained that of the Holy Bloodline, that Saunier had stumbled upon genealogical evidence proving Christ's family survived, and that this secret had been protected by the priory for centuries. Clues scattered throughout Rennes-le-Château only fueled the fire. The Magdalene Church itself sits on foundations far older than medieval records suggest, possibly Roman or even pre-Christian. Beneath its soil lie ancient tombs and caverns that have never been fully explored. The landscape surrounding it is dotted with names like Blanchefort and Bethania, echoing biblical and Grail-related imagery. Even the shape of the nearby mountain range forms what some claim is a natural pentagram, aligning perfectly with ancient monuments and the chapel's orientation. Skeptics dismiss these connections as coincidence or invention, yet even they cannot deny the magnetic power of the place. Visitors describe an uncanny stillness, as though time itself hesitates upon those stones. Historians point to the overlapping layers of faith, Roman temples, Visigothic fortresses, Templar ruins, all converging on this single point. Perhaps Rennes-le-Château became sacred not by design, but by destiny, a crossroads where centuries of hidden history converge. And what of the Church's response? Strangely muted, despite Saunier's defiance and scandal. Despite the global attention the mystery has drawn, official investigation into his wealth and discoveries has remained superficial. It is as if certain truths are best left buried. When researchers sought access to Vatican archives related to Saunier's case, their requests were quietly denied. Rennes-le-Château, then, is not merely a village. It is a mirror reflecting the deepest tensions in human faith, the hunger for revelation, the fear of forbidden knowledge, and the enduring suspicion that history, as we know it, has been carefully edited. Whether Saunier's secret was gold, genealogy, or something far stranger, the effect is the same, a whisper that refuses to die. As dusk falls over the Tour Magdala, the golden light spilling across the valleys, one cannot help but wonder, what did Saunier see in those hidden parchments? What knowledge was worth his silence? And his soul, perhaps like the Grail itself. The truth of Rennes-le-Château is not meant to be owned, only glimpsed, a fragment of divine fire, too bright for the world to bear. The legacy of the Roman legion is more than the story of an army. It is the blueprint of an empire, the foundation of Western military tradition, and the reflection of human discipline pushed to its limits. When Rome fell, its legions did not vanish into the dust. Their methods, symbols, and spirit lived on, echoing through centuries of history. The standard of the eagle, the Aquila, once carried by Rome's most elite soldiers, became the symbol of power and unity for empires yet to come. The Byzantines, the Holy Roman Empire, and even the modern nations that sought to emulate Rome's grandeur. Their formations inspired the tactics of medieval knights, Napoleonic soldiers, and modern infantry. The Roman concept of logistics, supply chains, and road networks laid the foundation for military strategy that endures even in today's armies. But beyond tactics and organization, the legion's deeper legacy lies in its cultural and psychological imprint. Rome's soldiers were not just warriors. They were builders, engineers, and colonizers who carried Rome's laws, language, and gods into foreign lands. They built fortresses that became cities, roads that became trade routes, and walls that defined borders still visible today. In every stone bridge and ancient camp discovered across Europe, the silent hand of the legion can still be felt. Even after centuries, their presence lingers, etched into the landscape, remembered in the ruins, and whispered through the languages that evolved from Latin. Yet, their story is not one of unbroken glory. The same discipline that forged them also crushed individuality. The same conquest that spread civilization also destroyed countless others. The legion was both creator and destroyer, an engine of progress and oppression. The men who marched beneath its banners shaped history, but they also bore the weight of it. Every victory carved into marble was built on the bones of those who never returned. And perhaps that is the true legacy of the Roman soldier, a reminder of the cost of empire, the fragility of power, and the enduring human desire to build something that lasts beyond death. As the centuries passed, the image of the Roman legionary became a myth, a symbol of courage, discipline, and the eternal march of civilization. Their helmets rest in museums. Their swords lie buried beneath the soil, but their influence remains alive in the structure of armies, the design of cities, and the very idea of organized state power. From Caesar's campaigns to the borders of Hadrian's Wall, the echo of their footsteps still resounds. And as historians uncover the traces of their existence, the world is reminded that these men, born into the dust and iron of a rising empire, with a living machinery that turned Rome's ambition into reality. In the end, the Roman legion was not just a military unit. It was a manifestation of human endurance and ambition. It proved what discipline, unity, and purpose could achieve, and what they could destroy. Every empire that followed carried some part of that legacy, both its triumph and its tragedy. The story of the legion is, therefore, not merely a chapter of Rome's past. It is the enduring heartbeat of history itself, pulsing through the ages as a testament to mankind's unending struggle to conquer the world and to understand the price of doing so. Beneath the grand banners of Rome and the glories sung by poets, there existed the silent multitude, the nameless soldiers who marched, bled, and died without record. Their stories are seldom told, lost amid the chronicles of generals and emperors. Yet it was these men who bore the weight of the empire's ambition, who carved its dominion into the soil with sweat and steel. They were peasants, slaves, freedmen, and foreigners, bound not by choice, but by necessity, duty, or desperation. In their ranks, a mosaic of humanity marched together, united under a single standard but divided by birth, language, and fate. To these forgotten soldiers, Rome was both master and mother. She fed them, trained them, and demanded their loyalty until death. A recruit from Gaul might have never seen the heart of Rome, yet he would fight and die for her glory in some distant province, believing that service would grant him land, honor, or citizenship. But for many, those promises were illusions, washed away by blood in foreign soil. The Roman machine was efficient but merciless, and those who could not keep up were abandoned to rot in unmarked graves, their bones blending into the landscapes they once conquered. In rare moments, their humanity flickers through the cracks of history. Inscriptions carved on tombstones, fragments of letters home, or graffiti scratched into the walls of distant forts. "I miss my home," wrote one soldier stationed in Syria. Another scrawled a crude sketch of a woman's face, perhaps a wife he would never see again. These small remnants speak louder than any triumphal arch, for they remind us that behind every battle formation stood real men, with fears, longings, and dreams that time could not entirely erase. Life in the ranks was a delicate balance between obedience and survival. The harsh discipline that maintained order also crushed the spirit. Whippings, executions, and humiliations were constant threats. Yet within this brutal system, bonds of brotherhood emerged, bonds forged in the fires of shared suffering. Soldiers protected one another, shared stolen wine, and told stories under the stars to keep madness at bay. To march with the legion was to surrender individuality and embrace the collective, where one's worth was measured by loyalty and endurance rather than name or birth. The voices of these men, though faint, carry the true emotional weight of Rome's expansion. They remind us that empire was built not by marble and decree, but by the flesh and endurance of ordinary lives. Each conquest demanded a price that history's grand narratives rarely acknowledge: the toll of human exhaustion, the loneliness of distant campaigns, and the quiet despair of those who died unknown. Their anonymity is their tragedy, yet it is also their legacy. Without their silent sacrifices, Rome's greatness would have been impossible. Today, as archaeologists uncover their remains, rusted armor, worn sandals, and bones buried in forgotten corners, the veil of history lifts for a moment. We begin to see the legions not as faceless instruments of conquest, but as living men caught between glory and oblivion. They were the hands that built the empire and the hearts that broke beneath its weight. And though their names are lost, their presence lingers. In every Roman road still stretching across Europe, in every fortress ruin standing against time, and in every whisper of the wind that once carried their marching songs across the empire's endless frontiers. The forgotten voices of the ranks tell a truth that the monuments never could: that greatness is born not only from the ambitions of emperors, but from the endurance of those who serve unseen. Their silence is the true echo of Rome, an eternal reminder that history, for all its grandeur, is written on the backs of the ordinary. As the centuries passed and the empire's golden light began to wane, the legions, once the very embodiment of Roman power, found themselves facing not glory, but decay. The once iron discipline that had forged the empire's backbone began to crumble under the weight of corruption, exhaustion, and neglect. Soldiers who had once marched proudly beneath the eagle's standard now trudged through mud, their armor dented, their spirits weary. The great machine that had conquered the world was beginning to rust from within. In the final days of the Roman legions, loyalty became a fragile thing. Many soldiers were no longer born of Rome's heartlands, but came from distant provinces, fighting for pay rather than patriotism. The empire had stretched too far, too thin, and its resources, both human and moral, were nearly spent. In the north, barbarian tribes pressed against the borders. In the east, old enemies grew bold once more. And amid this chaos, the legions stood like dying giants, still formidable, but no longer invincible. The fall did not come all at once. It crept in slowly, like a cold mist descending over a once proud battlefield. The pay grew late. Supplies dwindled. Commanders, more politicians and soldiers, sold loyalty to the highest bidder. In some provinces, legions mutinied, choosing survival over honor. Others vanished entirely, wiped out in ambushes, their standards lost, their names erased from the rolls. For every triumph once sung in Rome's amphitheaters, there were now only whispers of defeat and despair echoing through empty forts. Yet, even as the empire faltered, there were those who marched until the very end. One by one, the last legions faced their fates. Along the frozen Rhine, weary soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder as barbarian war bands approached, knowing reinforcements would never come. In Britain, abandoned by Rome, legionaries built crude fortifications from stone and wood, defending towns that no longer bore the empire's mark. They were ghosts of a vanished world, clinging to duty when duty no longer had meaning. The fall of a legion was not a spectacle. It was a quiet tragedy. There were no poets to sing their last songs, no emperors to mourn their loss. When the final eagle standard was taken, it was not amid ceremony, but chaos. Some buried their banners before the enemy could seize them, choosing to hide Rome's symbol in the earth rather than see it desecrated. Others fought to the last man, their discipline intact even as the world around them collapsed. To the end, they remained soldiers, faithful to an empire that had long forgotten them. As the Western Empire finally fell, and the last echoes of Latin faded from the frontiers, something of Rome lingered, not in marble, nor in law, but in memory. The spirit of the legion, the relentless will to endure, outlasted the empire itself. Even the barbarians who conquered Rome admired the strength of the men they had defeated, adopting their tactics, their formations, even their armor. The legion, though broken, became immortal through imitation. In the centuries that followed, legends emerged. Stories of hidden legions that never surrendered, of Roman soldiers wandering foreign lands, of lost standards waiting to be found. These tales blurred the line between history and myth, but perhaps that was fitting. For the legions were never just armies. They were symbols of human persistence, of the unyielding drive to fight for something greater, even as the world turns to dust around you. And so, when the last Roman soldier laid down his sword, he was not merely ending a chapter. He was sealing an era that had defined civilization. The roads he built, the walls he defended, the code of discipline he lived by, all became part of the foundation upon which future empires would stand. His march did not end in defeat, but in transformation. Rome's body died, but its spirit continued to march on. Through centuries, through nations, through every soldier who ever looked to the horizon and believed there was something worth fighting for. For in the end, the fall of the legion was not a story of loss, but of endurance, the quiet, unbreakable truth that even when empires crumble, courage endures. The Holy Grail has haunted human imagination for centuries. More than a cup or chalice, it is a symbol of divine connection, hidden knowledge, and eternal pursuit. Legends describe it as a vessel of miraculous power, capable of healing, granting wisdom, or even bestowing immortality. But beneath these tales lies a deeper, more compelling mystery. What if the Grail was not an object at all, but a living legacy, the bloodline of Christ, preserved through centuries by secret guardians and hidden orders? This idea transforms the Grail from a relic into a lineage, a symbol that merges the divine with the human, the spiritual with the tangible. Throughout history, the Grail has taken countless forms. In medieval romances, it appeared as a golden cup, a chalice imbued with light. Knights sought it with trembling devotion, believing that only the pure of heart could glimpse its radiance. In secret societies, its meaning shifted subtly. The Grail became a metaphor for enlightenment, a cipher for hidden truths, or a code embedded within sacred texts and architectural symbols. The Priory of Chaon, the Templars, and even later mystics all carried whispers of the Grail, often encoded in art, manuscripts, and rituals. For them, the Grail was not a relic to be possessed, but a legacy to be safeguarded, a living secret flowing through time. The trail of the Grail intersects with history's greatest enigmas. From Mary Magdalene's journey to southern France, to the rise and fall of the Merovingian kings, and the cryptic discoveries of Rennes-le-Château, the narrative threads converge on a singular possibility, that the Grail's essence survives not in gold or silver, but in blood. If true, this secret lineage would be humanity's most guarded inheritance, capable of altering the understanding of faith, power, and ancestry. The church, secular rulers, and secret orders alike may have fought over it, not for treasure, but for the control of knowledge too powerful to reveal. Even in modern times, the mystery endures. Scholars, explorers, and conspiracists pore over maps, documents, and ruins, seeking the faintest trace of the Grail's path. Some claim coded messages exist in Leonardo da Vinci's paintings, in the alignments of cathedrals, in the genealogical records of European nobility. Others believe the Grail's truth is not meant to be found by chance, but by insight, that its guardians have ensured it can only be discovered by those ready to understand its significance. Each generation uncovers fragments, yet the full secret remains elusive, as if time itself protects the bloodline from exposure. The emotional weight of the Grail legend is not found in gold or relics, but in human hope and longing. It represents a quest for connection with the divine, the yearning to reconcile history with faith, and the desire to find meaning beyond the mundane. To follow its trail is to walk in the footsteps of those who dared to believe that the sacred and the mortal are intertwined. Knights, priests, scholars, and mystics alike have risked their lives in pursuit of a truth that may forever remain just out of reach. The Grail, in this sense, is eternal, not because it exists in form, but because it exists in human aspiration, whispering across centuries that some mysteries are too profound to vanish. Perhaps the greatest revelation of all is not whether the bloodline exists, but what its possibility implies. What does it mean if history has been silently shaped by a lineage carrying a divine spark? What does it mean if the world has been guided by guardians unseen, protecting a secret that transcends kings, empires, and dogma? The Grail becomes a lens through which to reconsider faith, power, and destiny itself. It is a mirror reflecting humanity's deepest hopes, that there is meaning behind the chaos, that love and sacrifice endure, and that the divine is not absent, but hidden within our own lineage. Ultimately, the Grail's mystery remains unresolved, yet its influence is undeniable. From the deserts of Jerusalem to the hills of southern France, from royal courts to shadowed archives, it has shaped art, politics, religion, and imagination. It has sparked rebellion, devotion, and obsession. It has inspired poets and painters, scholars, and adventurers. And it continues to invite us, even now, to ask the questions that lie at the heart of human existence. What if the most sacred truths are hidden not in temples, but in the blood of the living? What if the Grail is not a prize to be claimed, but a story to be understood? As we stand at the threshold of history and myth, one thing is certain. The quest for the Grail is far from over. Its secrets, carefully protected through millennia, still call to the curious, the brave, and the devoted. It is a journey that transcends time, one that invites reflection on the mysteries of faith, the endurance of hope, and the unbroken thread connecting past to present. The Grail is eternal, not merely as legend, but as an enduring testament to humanity's relentless pursuit of the divine, a secret that challenges our understanding of history, belief, and ourselves.